Wounded by Love, The Life and Wisdom of Saint Porphyrios, edited from an archive of notes and recordings by the Sisters of the Holy Convent of Chrysopigi. Denise Harvey, publisher, Limni, Evia, Greece, 2005. I have run to the fragrance of your myrrh, O Christ God, for I have been wounded by your love. Do not part from me, O heavenly bridegroom. Note on the English translation. The contents of this book come from an archive of notes and recordings compiled by two women who knew Elder Porphyrios for a period of more than 3 decades. Throughout this time, they kept a record of his conversations, his reminiscences, and his words of spiritual guidance. When, some 10 years after the elder's death, these two women became nuns at the convent of Chrysopigi in Chania in western Crete, the archive was placed at the disposal of the convent. Under the guidance of the abbess of the community, Mother Theosini, the material that had been collected was carefully transcribed and edited in such a way as to allow Elder Porphyrios to speak for himself. The prime concern was to present the words exactly as spoken, preserving their immediacy and authenticity. At the same time, however, the material, often collected at very diverse times and in different contexts, was arranged into chapters according to subject matter in order to make it more accessible. The English translation similarly allows Elder Porphyrios to present himself and his teachings with a minimum of introduction. The figure of hieromonk or elder, Staretz, in the Orthodox Church has always been seen as a source of wisdom and guidance, and as possessing a gift of speaking directly to the heart. Biographical note. The narrator asks your patience and forbearance with any mispronunciation of Greek names and terms. Elder Porphyrios was born in the village of Agioiannis in the province of Carizia on the Greek island of Evia on the 7th of February 1906. The name he received at birth was Evangelos. His parents, Leonidas and Eleni Baraktaris, were poor farmers and had difficulty in supporting their large family. For this reason, his father left for America, where he worked on the construction of the Panama Canal. Young Evangelos was the 4th child of the family. As a boy, he looked after their sheep on the hills and had completed only the 1st class of primary school, when at the age of 7 he was obliged on account of his family's extreme poverty to go to the nearby town of Halkida to work. He worked there in a shop for 2 to 3 years. Thereafter, he went to Piraeus to work in a general store owned by a relative. At the age of 12, he left secretly to go to the Holy Mountain. His longing was to imitate St. John the Hut Dweller, whose life he had read and from whom he had felt a special affinity. The grace of God led him to the hermitage of St. George in Kafsokalivia, where he lived in obedience to 2 elders, natural brothers, Pantaleimon, who was a father confessor, and Ioannikios, who was a priest. He devoted himself with great love and in a spirit of utter obedience to the 2 elders who had a reputation for being extremely austere. He became a monk at the age of 14 and took the name Nikitas. 2 years later, he took his final monastic vows of the Great Schema. Shortly thereafter, God granted him the gift of clear sight. At the age of 19, he became very seriously ill and was obliged to leave the Holy Mountain. He returned to Evia, where he went to live in the monastery of St. Harlambos at Levka. A year later, in 1926, at the age of 20, he was ordained priest at the Church of St. Harlambos in Kimni by the Archbishop of Sinai, Porphyrios III, who gave him the name Porphyrios. At the age of 22, he became a confessor and a spiritual father. For a time, he was a parish priest in the village of Sakia in Evia. He lived for 12 years in the monastery of St. Harlambos in Evia, serving as a spiritual guide and confessor, and then for 3 years in the deserted monastery of St. Nicholas in Ano Vathia. In 1940, on the eve of Greece's entrance into the Second World War, Elder Porphyrios moved to Athens, where he became chaplain and confessor in the Polyclinic Hospital. He himself said that he served there for 33 years, as if it were a single day, devoting himself untiringly to his spiritual work and to the easing of pain and suffering. As of 1955, he made his home in the tiny monastery of St. Nicholas in Galicia on the foothills of Mount Penteli. He rented this monastic dependency, along with the surrounding area, from the Penteli monastery and worked the land with great diligence. At the same time, he carried out his copious work of spiritual guidance. In the summer of 1979, he moved to Milisi, a village some 30 miles north of Athens and overlooking his native Evia, with the dream of founding a monastery there. To begin with, he lived in a caravan under exceedingly adverse circumstances, and later in a simple room constructed from breeze blocks, where he endured without complaint his many health troubles. In 1984, he moved into a room in a wing of the monastery which was under construction. In spite of the fact that the elder was seriously ill and blind, he worked constantly and unstintingly for the completion of the holy monastery. On the 26th of February 1990, he was able to see his dream becoming a reality when the foundation stone of the Church of the Transfiguration was laid. During the final years of his earthly life, he began to prepare himself for his death. His desire was to return to the holy mountain and to his beloved Kapsokalivia, where, secretly and silently, just as he had lived, he would tender up his soul to her bridegroom. He was often heard to say, "My desire now that I have grown old is to go and die up there." So it was that he came to his saintly end in his hermitage in Kapsokalivia on the morning of the 2nd of December, 1991. The last words that were heard to pass from his lips were the words from our Lord's high priestly prayer, which he loved so much and repeated so often, "that they may be one." Part 1. The Life of Saint Porphyrios, 1906 to 1991. The Path to the Holy Mountain. My dream was to imitate St. John the Hut Dweller. I'm from the village of Agios Yannis. There's a village in Evia called Agios Yannis. That's where I'm from. My parents were poor, and so my father left the village and went to America. He worked there as a laborer on the Panama Canal. In the village, we children did chores from the earliest age. We would water the garden and the trees. We would bring in the animals. We would do whatever jobs the grown-ups told us to do. When I was little, I used to mind the flocks up on the mountain. I was slow-witted and shy. I went to school for only 1 year, and we learned virtually nothing because the teacher was ill. While I was looking after the sheep, I read the life of St. John the Hut Dweller, syllable by syllable. That's where my zeal to go and become a monk came from, even though I knew nothing. I hadn't even seen a monk or a monastery. Nothing. When I was 7, my mother sent me to Chalkida to work in a shop. It sold everything. Shops at that time used to have ironmongery, keys, screws, locks, and ropes, and so on. But they'd also have sugar and rice and coffee and pepper and everything you'd find in a grocer's. It was a big shop. There were 2 other boys there. I went and joined them. I did whatever they told me to. Everyone bossed me about, and I never was off my feet. I was always running to and fro. Before I arrived, the 2 other boys had worked out a system whereby they would go up on a balcony day and day, about to water the basil plants belonging to the boss's wife. They had a rota. When I arrived, they got me to do everything, to sweep the floor and water the flowers. It didn't cross my mind that it was unfair. I did everything. Wherever they told me to go, I went. One day, just as I was finishing sweeping the shop, I noticed that some coffee beans had spilled on the floor next to where I had gathered my pile of rubbish. There would have been about 15 beans in all. I went down and picked them up and walked over to the sack with the coffee beans. My boss was in his office. It had windows all around, and he saw me bending down and then walking over to the sack. He called out, "Angelos," meaning me. That's the way they used to call me when I was young. "Come over here." I went over. "What have you got in your hands? What's that?" "They're coffee beans. I found them over there and picked them up," I said. He started to shout. Tassos, Aristos, Yanis, Yorgos. One was in the storeroom and the others in various parts of the shop. The boss kept shouting. They all gathered in the office. The boss opened my hand. "Do you see that? What's that?" he asked. "Coffee beans," they answered. "Where did you find them, Angelos?" "They were littered on the floor, and I picked them up and was about to throw them into the coffee sack," I replied. Well, my boss started to give us a lecture. What went on in that shop was nobody's business. Such wastage. Scoops would be tossed right, left, and center. "Listen now," he said. "As from today, you're going to organize a rota for the jobs in here. 1 week it will be Aristos, 1 week Tassos, 1 week Angelos, for the flowers and for everything." My boss's family was very fond of me. They would invite me up to their house and would get me to sing to them whatever hymns I knew. They looked on me with real affection. My action in picking up the beans had made an impression on them, because they didn't know me. After 2 years, I went to Piraeus to work in a grocer's shop owned by a relative. The grocer's shop was also a tavern. There was a little attic there where I slept at night. The shop was on a hill in Tommaso Street. People would come by every day to do their shopping, and many of the customers would sit down to have a drink or a snack, since it doubled as a tavern. I developed a deep desire to become a hermit. One day, 2 elderly men came into the shop. They sat down, asked for 2 sardines and half an oka of wine. I fetched their order at once. Then I heard one of them say to the other, "You should see the wine I drank on the holy mountain. I haven't found wine like that anywhere." "So you've been to the holy mountain, have you?" asked the other. "Yes," he replied. "I left my home in Mitylene once. Coloni was my village, and I went off to the holy mountain. We used to drink Monozelitico wine there, and what a wine it was." "Did you go to become a monk?" queried the other man. "Yes, I wanted to be a monk, but I wasn't able to. I wasn't up to it. How I regret now that I didn't stay there." I listened to all this with great attention because sometime earlier a group of monks had passed by handing out booklets. One was about the life of St. John the Hut Dweller, which, as I told you, I had stammered through syllable by syllable while I was looking after the sheep in the village. I had reread it up in the attic by the light of a little lantern with considerable difficulty, because I hadn't learned to read properly. The life of the saint filled me with such enthusiasm that I wanted to imitate him. But about the holy mountain, I knew not a thing. "I went to become a monk, but I left," continued the old man. "How marvelous it was there! I saw monks, hermits, holy men, striving to love God and battling away in the wilderness with fasts, deprivations, and prayers. But I left it all behind, and returned to the world and snarled myself in 1,000 cares and troubles. I remember it all constantly, and I regret I didn't stay there, instead of landing myself back here in the world with all the troubles and trials of family and children. All these cares of life have brought me to my knees. Yes, I remember it all." Soon the 2 men got up and left, but my mind remained captivated by what I had heard. From that moment I was filled with zeal to go to the place he'd been speaking about. My mind became fixated on the idea that I could realize my dream of imitating St. John the Hut Dweller. It became my all-consuming desire. 2 days later, an elderly man, the same one, came in again. He lived close by. I went up to him, and out of earshot to the others, I asked him, "Tell me, Kyr Adonis, what are things like up there on the holy mountain? Is it a good place?" "You heard about it the last time. I can't tell you anything at the moment." And he didn't tell me anything. He left. But I, in the meantime, could think of nothing else. I developed a deep desire to become a hermit. But how? I didn't know how to get to the holy mountain. I had no money, nor did I know what to say to my boss. Well, Kyr Adonis came back one more time to the shop, and once again I secretly queried him about the holy mountain. This time he told me everything. But how was I going to leave? And what was I going to say? A little urchin for the love of Christ. For days on end I was downcast and lost in thought, and my boss noticed it. He came up to me and said to me, "Why are you looking unhappy? What's the matter?" I'm afraid I couldn't help telling a lie. I said that when I had left the shop to go fetch some food supplies, I had heard from someone from my village that my mother was ill, and I wanted to go and see her. He believed my story and gave me money for my ticket to go to my mother. He also gave me food to take to her, and showing his sympathy, he accompanied me out onto the road and wished me a safe journey. I ran down to the boat. I had set off for the holy mountain. I had begun to realize my dream. The boat was to sail via Chalkida, Volos, and then Thessaloniki. But after the boat had put to sea, I began to feel miserable. I wanted to reach my destination, but I was afraid, and I felt sorry for my parents who, not knowing where I was, would be sick with worry. I couldn't do it. When the boat put in at Limni and Evia, I got off and took the next boat back to Piraeus. I returned to the shop and announced that my mother had recovered. And so I carried on my work as before, but not exactly as before. I was pensive, I prayed continually, I ate little, I made prostrations, and as a result of all this I lost weight. I changed. "What's the matter, Angelos?" people would ask me. "What's wrong? We can see that there's something on your mind, my boy, and you've lost a lot of weight. You know we're fond of you, and we want you here, but do you perhaps want to go back to your parents?" "Yes," I answered, "I want to go home." "Go and see them then, if you like, and when you come back, bring with you another good lad like yourself for the shop." And so once again they gave me money, food, and sweets, some bottles of Piperman liquor and various other items. My boss took me down to the boat and bought me a ticket for Chalkida. It was a boat bound for Chalkida, Volos, Thessaloniki, the Holy Mountain, and Daphne. The boat was called the Athenia. I got on board and the boat set off. It was after dark when we left. We sailed all night. Eventually we arrived at Chalkida. When the boat had tied up, the sailor shouted, "Anyone for Chalkida? Anyone for Chalkida?" I kept my mouth shut and didn't say a word. I had snuggled up in a corner and kept quiet. The boat set sail from Chalkida. But when we arrived at Edipsos, the sailors discovered me because they were checking the tickets there. "Why didn't you get off at Chalkida?" they asked me. "I was sleeping," I replied. "What are we going to do now?" they asked. "You're going to have to pay." "I don't have enough money," I told them. "Never mind then," they replied. And so they took me along without paying. Money at that time was counted in 5 and 10-cent pieces. 1 drachma at the most would have been all I had with me. When we disembarked at Volos, I was suddenly overwhelmed with melancholy. I started to cry and cry. I thought about how I was going to leave the world forever, and about how my parents were going to lose me, and how they would be distressed and worried. I thought about my brothers and my sister. Something seemed to be choking me, and I wanted to go back. The boat berthed for several hours at Volos, and everyone got off. Then the whistle blew, and it pulled away for Thessaloniki. I stayed on shore, intending to go back. I spent the night up on a hill, crying and praying. The next day I found the boat that sailed the same passage to Thessaloniki. I got on board. My money had finished, and so, not having a ticket, I hid myself in the stern so that they wouldn't put me off the boat. At one point the sailors asked to see my ticket. Of course, I didn't have one, and they berated me loudly. I sat on a bench on the port side of the ship, weeping. As I wept, I looked out at the sea and sang to myself a verse from a hymn I'd been taught by my father. He was a chanter in the church, and he used to sing this hymn whenever All Souls Saturday came around. The words ran like this: "Beholding the sea of life, swollen, high, and raging wild, and through temptation's lashing storm, racing on to the calm of your haven fair, I cry, Lord, raise up my life from destruction and save me, O all-merciful." "My life, O Christ, is a tempestuous sea," I said to myself. "And just as I'm sailing on this rough sea, I ask you for your divine providence to lead me to a harbor so that my soul can find stillness there, in the harbor that you are, you who are peace." I said all this, or rather sang it, softly and wept because I was deeply affected by the fact that I was leaving the world. That is, I was leaving my parents. The world, it didn't matter to me. I wasn't concerned about the world, only about my parents. I was little, and I remembered only my parents, and I was pained that I was leaving them. Midday came, and people started eating on the deck. They sat together in their family groups, as people used to do then. Opposite me was a woman with her husband and their 3 children. I was sitting, looking out at the sea. At one point, a lady came up. Because the sailors had asked for my ticket and I didn't have one, people had seen that I was a poor boy. And she tapped me on the shoulder and gave me a piece of bread with 3 little bunches of white bait. In those days, people used to fry white bait in little bunches of 3 tied together with a piece of broom grass, which they passed through the fish's eyes. Then they would dust them with flour and fry them. I said to her, "Thank you. Thank you very much." Some of the other women who were nearby said to her, "Well done, that was a kind thing to do. How come you thought of that? It didn't occur to us." The woman, however, turned round and said to them, "No one should bother about children like that, little urchins, nor give them anything. But what are we to do? We're human too." Oh, when I heard the words, little urchin, I, poor little wretch, suddenly felt a surge of happiness inside me at the thought that I am really a little urchin. I had become a little urchin for the love of Christ, and I said to myself, "O Christ, save me and guide me." Eventually we arrived at Thessaloniki. We got off the boat. I didn't know where to go. I went to the church of Saint Demetrios and kissed the icons. I knelt down weeping and implored the saint to help me to become a hermit. That was my dream. Then I climbed up a hill and came to a little church, a country chapel. It was locked, but outside there was a wooden bench. I stayed there all night. I cried a lot. I wanted to go back, to go home to my parents. This was a sore temptation for me. 3 times I went back. While I was weeping, I kept repeating the words of the hymns of supplication to Our Lady that my father had taught me. "Do not despise my supplication. Do what's profitable to my soul." I said this again and again through my tears, and so I fell asleep. I forgot to tell you what I did with my parents, with the presents that my boss had given me, supposedly to take to my family. I gave them away to some young conscripts on the boat. I gave away the chocolates and the bottles of rose and peppermint liquor, and so I got rid of them. The soldiers were at a loss to understand why I was giving things away. I was a little boy, but they took them all the same. So, as I was saying, I fell asleep outside the little chapel. I woke up in the morning. I went down to the sea, got onto the boat. The temptation was too much for me, and returned once again to Piraeus. What can I say? It's a long story. I took a firm decision to leave and not come back. Following all these futile journeys and about-turns, after some time passed, I took a firm decision to leave and not come back. I resolved not to get off the boat again. Once again I embarked from Piraeus, without return, for the Holy Mountain. It was the 3rd time I was setting out, the last after all my misadventures. When we arrived in Thessaloniki, it was Saturday. At that time, Thessaloniki was dominated by the Jewish community. People didn't work on Saturdays. It was a ghost town. Everything was closed, neither boats nor sailings. We had arrived late on the Friday evening. Everyone got off the boat to buy something to eat. I didn't get off because I was afraid of temptation. I was frightened that something might happen to me and I wouldn't arrive at my destination. I gave someone 15 cents and he brought me bread and mackerel and I ate. For the whole day we all waited in the harbor because, as I said, nobody was working. As evening approached, monks started to arrive and board the boat. I watched them in awe. For the first time I was seeing monks in their cassocks. I had positioned myself by the gangway, and from where I stood I could see them all passing by. At one point a tall, elderly, and venerable-looking monk with a long beard and with a haversack on his back walked up. He came toward me. He took a seat on a bench and motioned me to sit down too. "Where are you going, my boy?" he asked. "To the holy mountain," I replied. "And what are you going to do there?" Concealing the truth, I answered, "I'm going to work." "Oh, come to Kafsokalivia," he said. "That's where I live with my brother in a hermitage in the desert. Come along, my boy, and we'll all glorify Christ together." Then he asked me, "What books do you read, my boy?" "The letter of Christ, the letter of Our Lady, the life of St. John the Hut Dweller," I answered. "I haven't been much to school." He made no comment about the books, about whether they were good or not. "Come with me," he said. "We've got work there, and we'll pay you. And we might even make a monk of you." As soon as I heard that word, a smile crossed my face. Then he said to me, "Listen, my boy, don't be upset at what I'm going to tell you. Young boys are not permitted on the holy mountain. You're very young, and they're prohibited from allowing you to enter." My face fell. "But don't worry," he said. "We'll tell a little lie, and God will forgive us. In God's eyes, it won't be a lie but a truth, because you love Christ and you want to go to the holy mountain to worship Christ. So whoever asks you, 'What's your relationship to the elder?' you'll reply, 'He's my uncle,' and I'll say that you're my nephew, my sister's son." Lots of other monks crowded onto the boat. Night fell. The monks all huddled close together, and each took out his food. We sat close to them, too. The elder gave me bread to eat. "What's your relationship to the boy, Holy Confessor?" they all asked. "He's my sister's son, my nephew. My sister has died, and because he's an orphan, I've taken him with me." A great miracle of God's providence. We sailed all through the night. In the morning at about 10 o'clock, we arrived at the port of Daphne. All the monks heaved up their haversacks filled with the items they had brought in from Thessaloniki for their various handicrafts. We walked down the ship's gangway. A rowing boat was waiting for us. My elder was given preference because he was a confessor and spiritual father. We clambered first into the little boat and arrived at the steps of Daphne. We got out. But then what happened? The elder distanced himself a little from me to find a spot to lay down on his haversack, and at that moment a tall guard dressed in his white kilted skirt and crowned with his red fez and black tassel grabbed hold of me, threw me back into the boat just as it was about to set out again to fetch more monks. "What business do you have here?" he shouted. "Children aren't allowed. Get back to the boat. Off you go." I started to cry. The boat began to pull out. At that moment, however, my elder noticed what was happening and ran shouting, "Stop! Bring the boy back. He's mine." The boat rowed back and I was freed. Then the guard said to him, at that time they wore white kilts and a red fez and sterling follows. They were present everywhere at all official ceremonies. The guard said to him, "Father, you're not allowed to take the boy with you." "I've no choice but to take him. He's my nephew," said the elder. "He's my sister's boy, and I can't leave him. He's an orphan. He's nowhere to go." "That's fine, but I'm the one who will be in hot water if I let a boy in." "Don't worry. Whatever happens, refer the matter to me. I'll speak to the elders, and you won't find yourself in any trouble." And so with the elder, my uncle, who indeed became my elder and spiritual father, Pantaleimon was his name, we went up to the skeet. By all this, I want to show how God worked many miracles on me, unworthy as I am. His hand very manifestly protected me everywhere. And so in this case, the hand of God led me into the hands of a holy elder and spiritual father who was to protect me. God had sent him, and this elder saved me. It was a great miracle of God's providence. In many things, God's providence has helped me, but above all, the great assistance I received was that I succeeded in going to the holy mountain at such an early age, in spite of the fact that it was forbidden. I knew nothing about monastic life, but God helped me. As I told you, we arrived at the skeet. From that time onwards, it was a different life, a life in Christ, a life of worship, a life free of care, a life of resurrection. The Holy Mountain, Kafsokalivia, 1918 to 1925. My life on the holy mountain was prayer, joy, and obedience to my elders. When I went to the holy mountain, I was young and uneducated. If I were to tell you about my life on the holy mountain, my love and my devotion, time would fail me to tell. My love for you incites me to tell you what I remember. When I went to the holy mountain, I was, as I told you, young and uneducated. I didn't know how to read. I read syllable by syllable. My elders, they were brothers, Elders Pantaleimon the Confessor and Father Ioannikios, asked me, "Can you read?" "A little," I answered. It was Saturday evening. They set me to read the Psalter. Shyly I started to stutter the words of the first psalm. "Blessed is the man." "That's fine, my boy, let me now read," said Father Ioannikios, "and you can read another day." He donned his glasses and started. "Blessed is the man who has not made his way." You can imagine my embarrassment. That was a lesson for me. I must learn to read, I resolved, and so I quickly set to work. Whenever I found a spare moment, and I had lots of free time, I would read the Psalter, the New Testament, and the poetic canons from the daily offices to loosen up my tongue, and so from the countless times I read it, I learned the Psalter by heart. I read even during the night. I felt that I was no longer on earth, but that I had been transported to heaven. One night there was a vigil service at the Kyriakon, the central church of the Skete, where the monks go on Sundays and major feast days all come together. The Church of the Holy Trinity. This was very shortly after I had arrived during the first few days. Our Skete was celebrating its feast day. My elders left in the early evening for the church and left me in the hermitage to sleep. I was young, and they thought I might not be able to stay awake until the morning when the vigil would end. After midnight, Father Ioannikios came and woke me up. "Wake up and get dressed," he said, "and we'll go to the church." I jumped up at once, and in 3 minutes we'd arrived at the Holy Trinity Church. He ushered me into the church first. It was the first time I had been inside. I was overwhelmed. The church was filled with monks, standing upright in an attitude of reverence and attentiveness. The chandeliers shed their light everywhere, lighting up the icons on the walls and on the icon stands. Everything was bright and shining. The little oil lamps were lit. The incense exuded fragrance, and the singing resonated devoutly in the otherworldly beauty of the night. I was overcome with awe, but also with fear. I felt that I was no longer on earth, but that I had been transported to heaven. Father Ioannikios nodded to me to go forward and kiss the icons. I remained motionless. "Take my hand! Take my hand!" I started to shout. "I'm scared." He took me by the hand, and gripping him tightly, I went up to venerate the icons. It was my first experience. It was engraved on the innermost soul. I will never forget it. I went through a period of temptation. I was very happy and enthusiastic about my life there. In the beginning, however, I went through a period of temptation. I started to think about my parents. I felt sorely for them. I was pained that they didn't know where I was. I thought about a cousin of my own age. I developed a desire to go to my village for a little, and to bring my cousin to the Holy Mountains so that he too could experience this wonderful life. I felt that I had an obligation to bring him to Christ. I didn't say anything, however, to my elder. And so I started to lose my appetite for food. My face grew pale, and I became melancholy. My elder noticed all this. One day he called me over and said to me with concern, "Hey, what's wrong, my boy? What's the matter with you?" I told him everything. That was the end of it. I was freed. The temptation passed. My appetite returned, and joy flooded my heart. I continued in obedience to my elders. My face shone. I grew more handsome and good-looking. Although I had been thin and scrawny to begin with, I later became quite handsome. My face became angelic. How did I see it? I had gone to see my elder, and as the sun struck his window, it became a mirror for me. And when I saw my face, I said to myself, "Goodness, how the grace of God has changed me." To begin with, I thought about my parents, and thought of them tormented me. Later, I didn't think about them. I remembered them only in my prayers for the Lord to save them. At first I longed for them. Later my longing was for my elders. I commemorated my parents in my prayer, but in a different way, only with the love of Christ. I started to fast more and to make greater ascetic effort, and I was filled with even greater mania and enthusiasm. I longed to be in the church continually, and I wanted to do whatever the elders wanted so that I could please them. There you see is the change, the transformation worked by the grace of God. I loved my elders. As I have said before, my elders were Father Pantaleimon and his brother Father Ioannikios. I loved them, though they were very strict. At the time I didn't realize this. Because I loved them, I had the impression that they didn't treat me with austerity. I had great respect, devotion, and love for them. My devotion was it that I saw the icon of Christ. Such was my awe and such was my devotion. After God came my elders. They were both priests. They came from the Karditsa area, from a village that is high up. What's the village called? It's worth recalling the name of the village. Yes, I remember. It's the village of Messinikolos, near Karditsa. That's where my woolen blanket is from, the one I slept on until recently. I was utterly obedient to them. Obedience, what can I say? I truly knew the meaning of that word. I abandoned myself to obedience with joy and love. It was this absolute obedience that saved me, and it was on account of this that God gave me his charismatic gift. Yes, I repeat, I was utterly obedient to my elders. Not forced obedience, but with love and joy. I loved them truly. And because I loved them, this love made me sense and realize what they wanted. I knew what they wanted even before they asked, and not only what, but also how they wanted each thing. I went here and I went there. I was devoted to them, and so my soul was winged with joy when I was with them. I thought of no one else, not my parents, not acquaintances, not friends, or the outside world. My life was prayer, joy, and obedience to my elders. If they said something to me once, I was to observe it always. For example, the elder once said to me, "Wash your hands before you eat, and every time we're about to go to the church, because we're entering a holy place and everything must be clean. Remember, we are both priests, and we celebrate the liturgy. We need to have hands clean and to have everything about us clean." And so every so often I would wash my hands with soap. There was no need for them to tell me a second time. Before I ate, I would soap and wash my hands. If we needed something in the church, I would wash my hands. If I picked something up, then I would wash my hands. When delicate work was required in my handicraft, I would first wash my hands. I did the same with everything without the slightest thought of demurral. And remember that I had 2 elders, and often they asked for conflicting things. One day Father Ioannikios said to me, "Take these stones from here and carry them over there." I took them to the place he showed me. Then the Father Confessor came by. As soon as he saw them, he scolded me angrily, saying, "You crooked fellow, why did you do that? Is that where we want those stones? Take them back to where you found them." Whenever he got angry, he would use the phrase, "You crooked fellow," to scold me. The next day, Father Ioannikios passed by. He saw the stones in their original place, and he fumed at me, saying, "Didn't I tell you to take the stones over there?" I hung my head and blushed. I made a penitent bow before him and said, "Forgive me, elder. I had carried almost all of them over, but the other elder saw me and said, 'Take them back where you found them. That's where we need them.' And so I took them back." Father Ioannikios said not a word. They did things like this to me often, but I never suspected anything. I didn't think, "Are you doing this to test me?" I never discerned, however, that they were testing me. But even if they were testing me, things occurred so naturally that I never realized it. That's important because if someone knows he is being tested, he can do even the hardest of tasks to show that he is being obedient. But if he's unaware that someone is testing him and indeed sees that person agitated and angry, then he can't avoid reacting and thinking, "Look at that now. Has this man been a monk here for all those years, and yet he still cannot control his anger? Can this be possible? Can a monk be irascible and pray? How has he not managed to rid himself of anger? These men are very imperfect. At all events, I didn't think in this way, nor did I know whether they were testing me. On the contrary, I took delight in these incidents, because I loved them. But they too had great love for me, even if they didn't openly display it. I loved both my elders, but I leaned particularly for support on the one who was my spiritual father, Elder Pantaleimon. Just as David says, "My soul has stuck fast behind you, your right hand has supported me," so my own soul stuck fast to my elder. This is quite true, and my heart was with his heart. I watched him. I sensed him. He took me out and we went to the Kyriakon, and from there we went to our various tasks together. It's incredible how much I sensed him. That sanctified me greatly. The fact that I stuck to him like a leech sanctified me. The fact that my heart was glued to his heart worked wonders for me. He was a very great saint. And yet the elder said nothing to me. Not only did he not tell me where he came from, he didn't even tell me his surname. Nothing. He never said, "in my village," or "my parents," or "my brothers." He was always silent and always praying and always meek. If he got angry any time, his anger and everything he said was all feigned. I loved him, and I believed that through my obedience to him and with my love for him, the grace he possessed visited me and stayed with me. I observed him in order to take something from him, to imitate him. I loved him, I revered him. I looked at him and received benefit. It was enough for me simply to look at him. We would go together on an entire expedition. We would walk from Kavsokalivia up onto the mountain to cut holm oaks. All the way, he would say nothing, not a word. I remember my elder showing me which oaks to cut. As soon as I cut one, I shouted with delight, "Elder, I've cut it." He said, "Go there with your saw." I cleared the brushwood round about so I could get in with my saw. He would then go to find me another. We would use the phrase, "with one puff," that is, at a single stroke. Again I would cry out, "Elder, I've cut it," with delight. These weren't natural things. It was my love. It was the grace of God that was transmitted from the elder to me, a humble boy. Do you remember the story that's told about a group of monks who used to visit one of the desert fathers and inundate him with questions? One of the monks would sit saying nothing and simply looking into the elder's face. In the end, the Abba turned to him and said, "Why don't you ask anything? Have you no questions at all?" The monk replied, "I wish for nothing more. It's enough for me simply to look at you, Yerunda." You see, he was gracefully enjoying him. He was inhaling him. That is, he was breathing in the grace of God through him. St. Simeon, the new theologian, he says the same thing. He confesses that he too received grace from his elder. Whatever I did with joy. My elders didn't give me heavy chores to do. I simply watered the garden and did my handicraft, that is, my wood carving. Nor did they give me instruction. To begin with, I went with them to the church services. Nothing more. After some days, the elder called me over and gave me a prayer rope. He told me to repeat the prayer, "Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me," every night. Nothing more. No instruction, no explanation. Before he gave me the prayer rope, he said, "Look, make a bow, kiss my hand, and kiss the cross at the top of the prayer rope, so that I may give you a blessing that God may help you." And that is how I learned to pray with a prayer rope. To begin with, they didn't send me on errands outside the hermitage. Whatever jobs I did in the house. Then I went out to the garden. I dug, watered, weeded, and whatever else I could. Later I started to learn wood carving. Once my chores were finished, they got me to read the Psalter while they worked. I was conscientious in my work, and I didn't want to disappoint them in any way. My only thought was how I could serve and please my elders in everything. Whatever they told me to do, I did, observing their instructions exactly. In order to be sure about what I was doing, I ran over in my mind again and again what they had said, learning it like a lesson. I worked over their words in my head. For example, my handicraft was wood carving. I watched how the elders went about it, and at night, when I went to bed, I went over the lesson in my mind. We take the piece of wood, we cut it, we place it in the water to soak, then we take it out and leave it to dry, then we cut it into shape, we plane it down, we smooth it with sandpaper, we take the rasp and we work it in this way and that, then we take a crystalline sea stone that makes the wood shine. They called it adamantine. Then we trace out the design and so forth. I went over the whole process in my head so that I wouldn't forget the slightest detail and so that I would do the job exactly as they wanted. I was afraid I might make some mistake and upset them. And so, whatever they told me, I learned by heart. They explained to me why it was essential for me to learn a handicraft. They said, "Be sure to learn your handicraft, otherwise you can't survive here. This isn't a monastery, a Cenobitic monastery, that is, with lots of produce from fields and orchards and vineyards. Here, you have to work to buy your biscuit." They explained this to me and taught me the art of wood carving, and so as not to disappoint them, I mentally revised what I had learned at night when I went to bed, as I said. And so in the morning, I was ready for work. Whatever I did with joy. I said to myself, I'm going to become a monk, and I have to learn what that means. I was inquisitive to learn everything in all its depth and breadth. I wanted to learn everything. I received my elder's blessing to read the service of monastic tonsure, and in 2 weeks I had learned it all by heart. It was not, of course, that I thought I would later become a preacher and that I would be able to make use of this knowledge, but simply out of love for Christ. I accustomed myself not to leave my thoughts free in order to acquire purity of mind. On the bench where I was working, where I was doing my wood carving, I also had the Holy Scriptures. I opened them and read. I had the Gospels, and I read them from the beginning of the Gospel according to St. Matthew, the book of the generation of Jesus Christ, son of David, I read, worked, and repeated the words in my head. I repeated the words of the Gospels innumerable times, and I remember them even now. What I wanted was to have holy words in my head. I never tired of repeating them again and again. I loved the divine words. I sensed them vibrantly and fathomed them ever more deeply. I would repeat them insatiably all day long. Even if I repeated them every day, I never tired of them. I had great enthusiasm, and when my elders would leave in the morning and return at night, I would be free and would go to the little chapel to St. George's to devote myself to prayer. I would go there, yes, and what would happen? I would be so filled with exhilaration that I wouldn't eat. I didn't want to be distracted, you understand? I repeated the Jesus prayer. I sang, and I read. I went there on my own. I had a really good voice. It's true, I had a really excellent voice. I'm not telling you this now in order to compliment myself, but because this is how I felt. I had a very good voice, and as I sang, the words sounded like laments. They were love songs. They were for Christ. They were whatever you like, you understand? My goodness, how many funeral services, how many whatever you like. Such things like this I sang. What can I do to make you there? Such like things I say. Something I have experienced, you understand? As time passed and I grew up a little and became stronger, the elders started to send me on errands outside the hermitage. In our hermitage in Kavsokalivia, we didn't have topsoil, and we brought it in from a considerable distance, lugging it on our shoulders. When I used to go in obedience to fetch earth and walked over toward St. Nephan's cave, it was my habit not to leave my thoughts to roam freely, but to learn by heart passages of Holy Scripture, the Psalms, and the poetic canons. I did this in order to have purity of mind. I never imagined that I would ever use the things I learned by heart in the way preachers do to speak in public and give sermons. I never imagined that I would leave the desert. Such a thought, it never entered my head. I believed that there I would remain, and there I would die. But without my realizing it and without my wishing it, I found myself outside the holy mountain. I stretched forth my hand and preached a sermon. One day my elders sent me to bring earth over to the skeet. Once I'd walked some way along the path to St. Nephon's chapel, I was, as usual, going over in my mind the words of St. John's Gospel, and gazing out at the Aegean Sea which stretched out in horizonless infinity. I stopped for a moment on a rock, breathed in the fragrance of the thyme, and, exhilarated by the exuberance of nature, I started to shout. I stretched forth my hand and preached a sermon. Yes, I assure you, it's quite true. I laid down the sack I was taking to fill with earth, and, standing on the rock, I stretched out my hand. In a loud voice and speaking deliberately, I commenced. And this is the judgment, that the light came into the world, and men loved darkness rather than light, for their works were evil. For everyone who does evil hates the light, and does not come toward the light, in case his works be reproved. I recited the passage to the end. And to whom did I address this sermon? To the empty air, to the sea, to the whole wide world. Without anyone to hear, I preached it in the midst of the wilderness. Well, what sort of things should I tell you about? I tell you about the things that I loved, and I remembered them so vividly. I ran. I didn't walk. I didn't want at all to stay still. I wanted to be always on the move, watering plants and chopping wood, and everything was done with a bow and a blessing. I was filled with joy and exhilaration. I felt full and overflowing, and I ran. I ran. I didn't walk. I was embarrassed, however, to let the elders see me running, and so I walked slowly to begin with, and when I was out of sight, I started to run. I took wings in order to go quickly and return quickly to my elders. A life free of care. What can I say? This life is truly angelic. And that blessed elder of mine was also full of eagerness for activity. He would say to me, "Go here, go there." It's true, of course, that we had lots of jobs to do. They had given me responsibility for the hermitage, and we kept a house well ordered and well looked after. We had olive trees, we had a few fruit trees, and we had a vegetable garden. The work naturally made me tired. I did lots of jobs. I went up to the mountain. My feet often got cut. How were my elders to know? They saw me as a child. When I came down from the mountain after walking for 3 hours, Father Ioannikios might say to me, "Tomorrow we're going to make bread, so get ready now and go fetch wood for the oven." So I would take a rope and go up to the mountain for branches. I walked on paths, but also over rough ground. The elders would often send me to fetch logs or sticks, and I would load them onto my back like a donkey. And, fully loaded as I was, and with my back aching, I would sit on the stone wall to rest. If the load were particularly heavy, I would say to myself, "I'll show you, you old donkey." I didn't know the meaning of laziness. Indeed, I didn't show any pity for my body. If my knees hurt, I wanted to take revenge on them. The more they protested and hurt, the greater the burden I loaded on my back. "I'll show you, you old donkey," I would repeat. I took revenge. I took revenge on my bad self. It's incredible that when I was a 17-year-old boy, I loaded myself with a weight of almost 200 pounds and carried it all the way for a distance, let's say from like Ammonia Square up to the top of Lycophyditos Hill. There was no question of laziness. I liked to pray even when I was tired, and when I was exhausted, I sought God even more. You must believe this and realize that it's truly possible. It's a matter of love. It's not simply that you work quickly. You do one job, then you begin another. You come back and yet do another. And you make sure that you finish them all. You water, you hoe, you bring earth and branches, you go up to the mountain, you fetch wood for your wood carving. With love, you are in perpetual motion. You should see, then, where sins go. They all fall into a deep sleep. Do you hear? This is truly a life lost from the world, a blessed and holy life, a life in paradise. I was a wild goat of the forest. I can't give you an example of what real obedience is. It's not that we have a discussion about the virtue of obedience and then I say to you, "Go and do a somersault," and you obey. That's not obedience. You need to be entirely carefree and not thinking at all about the matter of obedience, and then suddenly you're asked to do something and you're ready to do it joyfully. If you're busy at work and not at all in a state of vigilance and readiness and someone humiliates you, then by your reaction you will show whether or not you have obedience. I followed the instructions of my elders to the letter. They said to me, "You won't speak and you won't say what we do or what order of prayer we keep in the hermitage. If you meet a monk on the road and he says, 'Evlogite, your blessing,' you'll reply, 'Your blessing,' with respect and Christ's love. And if he is an elder, you will kiss his hand. If he asks you, 'How are your elders?' you will reply, 'With your prayers they're well,' and continue at once on your way without any further conversation. And if he comes up behind you and approaches you and asks you something, don't stop and don't reply, because not all monks are good, and you need to be careful. Whatever they ask you, you will reply, 'I don't know. Ask my elder. I don't know.' Say, 'Evlogite,' say your blessing, and leave. Don't let them tell you, 'Wood carving is not such a good handicraft. Hey, come and learn from us icon painting or music and such like.' Don't listen to anything. Continue your path." Once they sent me to St. Nephon's, and on the way I met 3 men from the world. Kosmikos, that's what the people in the Holy Mountain call those who are not monks. And as usual, when I approached them, I said, "Your blessing," and walked past, since I had really wild appearance, and one of the company commented, "Man, that poor boy, he doesn't seem to be quite right in the head." I had by this time walked on, but I had very sharp hearing, and when I heard this, I was pleased by the humiliation. I smiled inwardly. He's right, I thought, he's quite right, but what would he say if he knew my real madness? I didn't go out often, nor did my elders take me to the feast day celebrations. When a saint had his feast day, and the elders would go to the church dedicated to his memory, and they left me at home. The elders used to light a fire in the hermitage. I didn't want to be near it. I didn't approach the fire at all. The old men would sit close to the fire, and I would sit further off. I was afraid. I was afraid the fire would spoil me. I said so to my elders, and the dear men let me be. It's a matter of habit. If you once get accustomed to sitting by the fire, you cannot then endure yourself to hardship. If I ever caught a cold, I would drink a cup of tea, make some 500 or 600 prostrations, perspire profusely, and then change my clothes. After that, I would lie down on the mattress and I would get well again. I was quite genuinely a wild man. I was a wild goat of the forest. I ran around in the snow and across the rocks barefoot. You should have seen how red my heels and feet became. My elders didn't oblige me to be barefoot, and they themselves weren't barefoot. It was something I wanted myself. But on the other hand, they didn't tell me to take off my shoes. In the chapel and in the Kyriakon, however, I wore both socks and shoes, not the wooden soled clogs. I remembered something very lovely. It was springtime, and my elders sent me to Karasia. As I was running, I took off my clogs because I wanted my feet to make footprints in the snow and the frost. Because my elders saw me living like this, they took delight in it, in me too. It may be that they humiliated me and scolded me even when I did something good. They said it was bad. Not always, of course, but they wanted to catch me out when I wasn't expecting it. My elders were exceedingly saintly. They instructed me in many ways, often with austerity. They never said, "Well done." They never praised me. Their counsel were always how to love God and how to humble myself, how I should invoke God to give strength to my soul and love him greatly. That's what I learned. "Well done" were words I never heard, nor did I ever seek to hear them. Even at home I never heard the words, "Congratulations, that was well done." My mother scolded me. My father was away. He was in America. He worked for years and years on the Panama Canal. That did me a lot of good. A person who is accustomed to humiliation attracts the grace of God. If my elders weren't scolding me, I was disconsolate and thought to myself, "Heavens above, couldn't I have found better elders than these?" I wanted them to castigate me, to scold me, to treat me harshly. Now I realize just how severe they were. At the time, I didn't realize it because I loved them. Never would I have wanted to be parted from them. Sometimes my excessive zeal would lead me astray. I would do things without a blessing. Well, that's egotism. I'll give you an example. Listen. My elders would often be away working all day and would leave me alone in the hermitage. I would busy myself with my handicraft. My handicraft was wood carving, as I've told you. They still didn't show me everything about the craft. They were afraid I might leave. So one day I took a fine piece of white wood and traced out a design on it. I carved a very fine blackbird, full of movement with its wings stretched back and pecking at a grape. The grape was hanging from a branch of a climbing vine that had 2 or 3 leaves, and the blackbird was taking the grape in its open beak. It was very fine. I'd finished it all off with sandpaper. When my elders returned, I went to greet them with a bow. I took my carving with me and said to Father Ioannikios, "Look what I've made." As soon as he saw it, his eyes glazed over, and he started raging. "Who told you to make that? Did you ask anyone?" He grabbed it, threw it on the floor, smashing it to smithereens. "Go at once and tell the elder," he said. I was mortified, and I asked his forgiveness. Without realizing it, I had upset them. Why do you do things without asking? Go at once to the elder and show him the pieces, and make confession. I went straight away to the elder and showed him the pieces, and he said to me, "You shouldn't have done that, my boy. Nothing gets done without a blessing. That way you can easily be led astray and lose the grace of God." I made a bow of penitence and asked his forgiveness with simplicity, without passion. The reproach didn't vex me. On the contrary, I thought my elders should have been harsher to me. They should have punished me. On another occasion, however, I was deliberately disobedient. One day before the elders left for work, my spiritual father said, "Hey, do you see that book up on the shelf there? Don't touch it. It's not for you. You're too young. Later, when you've shown improvement, when you're more humble, then you'll read it." That for me was law. I didn't so much as glance at it. But one day, when the elders had left for Charismatic, I was overtaken by curiosity. I went over and looked up at it. It was high up. I was small and couldn't reach it. I turned the matter over and over in my mind. Then I said to myself, "At least let me see what it's about." So I pulled across a stool, climbed up, reached for it, and brought it down. What a pity! The letters were all jumbled up like in a foreign language. It was written by hand, a large book, very large, thick book. I couldn't understand all the strange abbreviations. Later I learned to read them. But you should have seen the letters and all the calligraphy. It was a manuscript. It was by St. Simeon the New Theologian, a very big book with thick pages. It was also very heavy. So now I was going to read it, was I? I couldn't. I placed it back up on the shelf. But after this I felt depressed, troubled, sad. I could neither work nor pray, nothing. On other occasions when my elders were away, I would go to the church and would be overcome by a sense of deep devotion. And since I had a good voice, I would sing. I sang hymns, kneeling away in a lament-like fashion. The hymns were deeply poignant, and I enjoyed them and was moved by them. This time, however, after my disobedience, I did not go to the church. I went outside, sat on the wall, and gazed glumly out at the Aegean Sea. I sat and looked at the sea. I didn't want to even repeat the Lord Jesus Christ. You see the state that I was in? Great dejection. So that was that. I didn't go to church and I didn't pray the Jesus prayer. Melancholy took hold of me. Yes, of course I had faith in God, but I didn't want to contravene the elders' instructions. I sensed the presence of God, but I didn't want to upset any person. I didn't want to cause anyone to be saddened. What was I to do? As evening fell, the elders arrived back. What was I to do, poor wretch? I said to myself that I would tell them, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I went to the church because I was obliged to go with the elders. We read Vespers and we read Compline. I said nothing. I went up to my cell. I didn't do my prostrations or my rule of psalmody or my prayer rope. I lay down and contemplated what I'd be like when I died, lying in my coffin. Needless to say, I was miserable. Next morning the bell rang. We went down to the church and I read. We finished Matins, said the dismissal, and went out. We left the church to go to the refectory. I couldn't stand it any longer. I tugged a little at my elder's, that is, my confessor's, sleeve, and I said to him, I want to see you for a minute, elder. At once he turned back, and we went into the church again. And I told him, I'm very troubled, I said. I've been disobedient. You told me not to touch that book, and I had a look at it, and since then I haven't been at peace. No Kyrie Jesu Christe, no Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. No psalmody, no prayer, no prostrations, Matanias. Didn't I tell you so, my boy, he said. Why did you do it? Forgive me, elder. Temptation got the better of me, and I'm very sorry. Forgive me, and with your prayers I'll be more careful in the future, and I won't be disobedient. He read a prayer of forgiveness, and do you know? All my tortured thoughts disappeared. That was one good thing. As soon as I confessed to the elder, glory to God, I got over everything immediately. Every time I confessed, I was filled with a great sense of joy, and I devoted myself passionately to prayer. I believed that I had told everything to God, that I was once again with God. You can't imagine how strongly I had that feeling. And nowadays I hear some monks saying, make sure the elder doesn't hear about that. Can you believe it? For us, on the contrary, the elder pervaded our whole being into the innermost recesses of our heart. I loved the elders very much, though at that time all novices and those in obedience loved their elders. After God, what counted was the opinion of your elder. If you did anything contrary to that, any disobedience, you couldn't receive Holy Communion or anything. The secret of spiritual life is obedience. Many of those on the holy mountain lived secretly. They died without anyone knowing them. I too wanted to live secretly. I didn't want to be a preacher or anything, and it never crossed my mind to go out from the holy mountain. A young boy in complete wilderness. To experience the sense of the desert and of the helplessness, I would climb up the mountain and stay there for hours. I wanted to live as a hermit. I found wild herbs and berries and I ate them. I did this as a form of asceticism. I wanted to live on my own, just like the saint I had fallen in love with when I was little, St. John, the hut dweller. He was my favorite saint. He was the one I imitated. It made such an impression on me that he was able to endure staying close to his parents, setting up his little hut next to them, without revealing himself to them and giving them strength all the time. You pitched your tiny hovel by the gates of your parents. That's what his troparion says. With fervor from infancy you longed and sighed for the Lord. You left behind willingly the world and all its delights, and struggled without doubt. You pitched your tiny hovel by the gates of your parents. Ambushes of the demons you dispersed and defeated. So rightly, John, most blessed, Christ's crown of glory was given you. And another hymn, sung on his feast day, says the same. Poor as another Lazarus, you waited long and patiently before your parents' mansion gates, within your tiny hut confined. O Holy Father, Saint most wise, but now, O John, you found a home, a spacious, glorious dwelling place, shared with the hosts of the angels and all the saints in the heavens. I told everything to my elder, yes, whatever I was thinking, and he from time to time, when he saw me straying to extremes, would tell me, delusion, my boy. My whole life was a paradise, prayer, worship, handicraft, and obedience to my elders. But my obedience was the outcome of love, not coercion. This blessed obedience benefited me greatly. It changed me. I became sharp-witted, quick, and stronger in body and soul. It made me know everything. I must glorify God day and night for granting me the possibility of living in this way of life, in this life. Obedience is something I have pored over and studied minutely. The other things that God has given me in my life came on their own. The gift of clear sight was also given to me by God on account of obedience. Obedience shows love for Christ, and Christ especially loves the obedient. That's why he says, I love those who love me, and those who seek me will find grace. Everything is written in Holy Scripture, but in a concealed manner. I had great zeal for spiritual things. My elders never ordered me what to do. They gave me a prayer rope and told me, say the prayer. Nothing more. They saw that I was a fanatic, and they didn't tell me much, not even what to read. They wouldn't let me read anything from the great fathers which contain austerities. That is, Saint Ephraim, Saint Isaac the Syrian, Saint John of the Ladder, Saint Simeon the New Theologian, and the Evangelinos, and so forth. They had forbidden me. So, in obedience, I read only the lives of saints, the Psalter, the Book of the 8 Tones, and the Menea containing the hymns for the days of each month. And that was where I learned to read from, because to begin with, I wasn't able to. But I had great zeal for spiritual things. Every so often I would go to the chapel of St. George, which I also helped to build, and I would sing lots of the sung parts of the services. Most of all, I liked the Trinitarian canons. I liked also the hymns that are imbued with divine love, divine eros. It was a lament, a love song, call it what you like. I shed lots of tears, but they weren't tears of sadness, but tears of joy, divine joy. I was moved. I sang them beautifully. This was my life. I lived with the Lord's grace, not with my own strength. All these things were gifts of divine grace. They didn't come from my own ingenuity or from my learning, which I didn't have, nor it was from the grace of God. On some occasions, however, I strayed. I took some initiatives without asking my elders. Listen, in order to have purity of mind, I started to learn the Holy Scripture by heart. I started at the beginning, from the Gospel according to St. Matthew. One day an opportunity arose, and I recited to them the first chapter of St. John's Gospel by heart. When they heard it, they scolded me, because I had done it without a blessing. I had waited for this moment with longing. Where should I start, my children, to tell you about how I became a monk? My life on the Holy Mountain is a long story. When I'd reached the age of 14, my elder called me and said to me, "What are you going to do? What are your plans? Are you going to stay here?" "I'm going to stay," I exclaimed, beaming with pleasure and joy. "Make a bow." I made a bow. Then he brought me a cassock of his own, which was old and worn, and which he kept for work. It was so patched and mended that the original cloth could barely be seen, and the collar was greasy and stained by sweat. I had seen young monks in the Kyriakon. They had been handsomely dressed, and I had dreamt of a cassock like theirs. What can I say? I had waited for this moment with longing, and, young as I was, I had imagined the cassock I would be given to wear, and how fine and splendid it would be. But when the time came, what did I see? A patched old rag. I was disappointed a little for maybe 5 minutes. I was young at the time, you see, 14 years old. I didn't say anything, though. I didn't complain. When I saw the cassock, I felt suddenly crestfallen, as I said, and I quickly thought of the positive side. "With your blessing," I said, and took it. I didn't think about the matter again. I thought about the hermits who wore hair shirts and never took them off or washed them. God, therefore, gave me great consolation. I went to the reading desk. The Epistle of St. John happened to open before me, and that same day, my God, you spoke to me. Oh, my God, you spoke to me so much. 2 or 3 years later, I was tonsured into the great schema. 2 or 3 years later, I was tonsured into the great schema. The day before, I received another special blessing. We had to go along with my elder to the monastery of the Great Lavra to obtain permission for the tonsure. The abbot who gave me the permission was very saintly. As we were walking from the place where St. Nilos the Merstreaming had lived toward the Lavra monastery, I smelled for the first time the heavenly aroma. The fragrance flooded over me, and I exclaimed about it to my elder. He smelled the fragrance in a simple, matter-of-fact sort of way, said nothing, and walked on. That's how we must view these things, with simplicity. I smelled the fragrance for a second time, the relics of St. Harlambos. On the night of my tonsure, all the fathers gathered in the Church of the Holy Trinity, the Kyriakon. There they held a vigil service, chanting beautifully and devoutly, while filled with contrition I stood unshod in white socks. I made a prostration to all of the fathers and venerated the icons. Then the presiding elder addressed to me the special questions for the great schema. My eyes were filled with tears of emotion. Once the vigil was over, we went to the hermitage. I was very happy, but silent. I wanted to be alone with God alone. And when you're in that state, you don't want to sing or speak. You desire silence to hear in crystal purity the voice of Christ. I loved the vigils on the Holy Mountain. The life of the Holy Mountain is a life of vigil and wakefulness. During the vigil service, when it is done properly, that is, when those participating are united in common worship, a spiritual atmosphere is created into which all enter easily and from which great spiritual benefit is derived. The soul is refined, and the most suitable conditions for spiritual elevation and deep communication with the Lord are created. At 2 o'clock in the morning, on the Holy Mountain, a true earthquake takes place. I would always be filled with awe at that time. Prayer would cause the whole place to tremble, the entire spiritual world. Now that's what love for Christ is. On the Holy Mountain, I loved the vigil services very much. I became a different person. I was always very concentrated and focused. I had a great desire to hear the words. I didn't want sleep to snatch my mind away even for a moment. I didn't become heavy-eyed. I followed the services with irresistible devotion, with eros. When on occasion I would be sitting in the stalls at the side of the church, I didn't lean on to the back of the stall for fear of falling asleep. After the Divine Liturgy, again, I didn't want to sleep. The sense of love was what dominated, and that's why I kept awake. The grace possessed by that saint radiated into my own soul, too. In the Kyriakon, where I went for vigils and other services, I got to know holy men. Listen, and I'll tell you about a hidden saint. Up above our hermitage, very high up, there was a Russian, old Dimas, who lived alone in a primitive hovel. He was exceedingly devout. Old Dimas remained virtually unknown throughout his life. No one mentions his name or speaks of his charismatic gift. Think of what it meant for him to leave Russia. Who knows how long his journey took? He left everything behind to come to the end of the earth, to Kavso-Kalivia. There he spent his whole life, and he died unknown. He was no egotist. On the very contrary, he was a fierce combatant. He had no one with whom to share his experiences and to whom he could say, "I did 500 prostrations today, and this is what I felt." He was a secret combatant. Yes, indeed, that is a perfect thing, perfect and selfless. Selflessness, worship, holiness, face-to-face, without any sense toward men, the servant before the master. Nothing else at all. No abbot, no well done, no why is this thus. I saw a living saint, yes, an unknown saint, poor and disdained. Who knows when he died? After how many days or even months, if it were winter time, would we learn of it? Who would go all the way up there to his rude stone hovel? No one saw him. Often those hermits would be found 2 or 3 months after their repose. The outpouring and superabundance of grace flowed over my pitiful self when I saw old Dimas making prostrations and dissolving in tears in his prayer in the Kyriakon. With the prostrations of that man, grace overshadowed him so profusely that it radiated out even over me. It was then that the richness of grace was released over me also. Certainly the grace existed before with the love I had for my elder, but it was then that I sensed the grace with exceptional intensity. Let me tell you how it happened. One morning at about 3:30, I went to the Catholicon, to the Holy Trinity Church, for the service. It was still early. The Simantron had not yet been sounded. No one was in the church. I sat in the narthex beneath a stairway. I was hidden from sight, and I was praying. All of a sudden the church door opened, and in walked a tall, elderly monk. It was old Dimas. As soon as he entered, he looked around and saw no one. So then, holding a large prayer rope, he started to make rhythmic prostrations, rapid and numerous, and at the same time he repeated continually, "Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. Most Holy Theotokos, save us." After a short time he fell into ecstasy. I simply cannot find words to describe to you his behavior before God. Motions of love and worship, motions of divine craving, of divine love and devotion. I saw him standing, opening out his arms in the form of a cross, like Moses at the Red Sea. And he made a sound. And what was that? He was bathed in grace. He shone in light. That was it. Immediately his prayer was communicated to me. Immediately I entered into the atmosphere surrounding him. He hadn't seen me. Listen, I was deeply moved and I started to shed tears. The grace of God came upon my pitiful and worthless self. How can I describe it for you? He transmitted the grace of God to me. The grace that saint possessed radiated into my soul also. He transmitted to me his spiritual gifts of grace. So old Dimas had fallen into ecstasy. It happened without his willing it. He couldn't control his experience. That's not right either, what I'm saying. I can't express it. It is a seizure by God, divine catalepsy. These things cannot be explained. They can't be explained at all. And if you explain them, you fall very wide of the mark. No, they cannot be explained, nor can they be rendered in books, nor can they be made comprehensible. You must be worthy to understand them. Old Dimas transmitted to me the charisma of prayer and of clear sight. At 4:00 the bells rang. As soon as he heard the bells, old Dimas made a few more prostrations and stopped praying. He sat on the low stone surround. I think there was a stone-built surround in the narthex. And in came Makaroudas. That was their affectionate name for Makarios. He was nimble and soft-spoken. He was a little angel. How well he lit the oil lamps. How well he lit the chandelier. How well he snuffed out the lights again, one by one. How well he made his prostrations, and he asked forgiveness right and left, to take the service books in order to intone the words for the singers. How I loved him. He deserved to be loved because he had the grace of God. So Makarios entered into the main church, and old Dimas followed him, opened the door, and entered also. He stood and arranged himself in his stall, thinking that no one had seen him. I too, concealed by the shadow of the stairway, stealthily and gingerly entered the main church. I went and venerated the icon of the Holy Trinity and returned and stood to one side. At the summons, with the fear of God, many of the Holy Fathers received communion. I too made a prostration and received communion. From the moment that I received communion, I was overcome by an intense joy and enthusiasm. After the service, I went out into the forest alone, full of joy and exultation. Madness. As I walked toward the hermitage, I silently repeated the prayers of thanksgiving. I ran through the forest passionately, jumping for joy and stretching my arms out wide in enthusiasm, and I shouted aloud, "Doxa tol Theo, glory to you, O God! Glory to you, O God!" Yes, my arms remained stretched out rigid like a piece of wood, and my body formed the shape of a cross. If you had seen me from behind, you would have seen a cross. My head was lifted up to the sky, and my chest was expanded, along with my outstretched arms ready to take off for the heavens. My heart wanted to fly. What I'm telling you is true. I experienced it. How long I remained in this state, I don't know. When I came to, I lowered my arms and walked on silently with tears still in my eyes. I arrived at the hermitage. I didn't eat anything as I usually did. I couldn't speak. I went to the chapel, but I didn't sing anything. None of the hymns of contrition that I usually sang. I sat in my stacidi and repeated, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. I continued in that state, but somewhat more calmly. Emotion was choking me. I dissolved in tears. They poured effortlessly from my eyes on their own. I didn't want them, but it was emotion at the visitation of God. The tears did not stop until the evening. I couldn't sing or think or speak. And if anyone else had been there, I wouldn't have spoken to him. I would have gone away to be on my own. One thing is certain, old Demas transmitted to me the charisma of prayer and of clear sight at the time when he himself was praying in the narthex of the Holy Trinity Church, the Catholicon of Kafso-Kalivia. What happened to me was something I had never thought of, never had I ever desired it nor expected it. My elders had never spoken to me of these gifts of grace. That was their way. They didn't teach me with words, only with their way of life. When I read the lives of the saints and the ascetics, I saw the gifts that God gave them. Believe me, I never thought that I would receive some charisma from God. It never crossed my mind. And that which I had never thought of appeared suddenly, and I never gave any importance to it. In the evening of the same day I went out of the church and sat on the low wall looking out to the sea. It was approaching the time when my elders usually returned. While I was looking to see if they were coming, I saw them suddenly appear. I saw them descending some marble steps. But that place was far away, and I shouldn't normally have been able to see it. I saw them by the grace of God. I was filled with enthusiasm. It was the first time that this had happened to me. I jumped up and ran to meet them. I took their haversacks. How did you know we were coming? Asked the elder. I didn't reply, but when we arrived at the hermitage, I approached the Father Confessor, Father Pantaleimon, and secretly and out of the hearing of Father Ioannikios, I said to him, I don't know how to explain this to you, but when you were on the other side of the hill, I saw you loaded with your haversacks, and I ran to meet you. The hill was like a pane of glass, and I saw you on the other side. All right, said the elder. Don't give any importance to these things, and don't tell anyone, because the evil one is watching. I lived among the stars in infinity, in heaven. The gift of clear sight, as I have told you, was something I had never desired, nor when I received it did I attempt to increase it or cultivate it. I gave no importance to it. Neither have I ever asked, nor do I ask God to reveal something to me, because I believe that is counter to His will. But after the experience with old Demas, I changed completely. My life became all joy and exaltation. I lived among the stars in infinity, in heaven. I wasn't like that previously. From the moment I experienced the grace of God, all the gifts were multiplied. I became sharp-witted. I learned the Trinitarian canons, the canon of Jesus and other canons. Simply on their being read and sung in the church, I learned them by heart. I recited the Psalter by heart. I took care with some psalms that have similar words so that I didn't mix them up. I genuinely changed. I saw lots of things, but I didn't speak. That is, I wasn't given the right to say anything. I wasn't informed to speak. I saw everything, I registered everything, I knew everything. From my joy I no longer walked on the earth. My sense of smell was opened, and I smelled everything. My eyes were opened, and my ears were opened. I recognized things from far away. I distinguished the animals and the birds. From the sound of the call, I knew if it was a blackbird or a sparrow, a finch or a nightingale, a robin or a thrush. I recognized all the birds by their song. At night and at dawn, I delighted in the chorus of nightingales and blackbirds, all of them. I became another, a new, a different person. I turned everything I saw into prayer. I referred it to myself. Why does the bird sing and glorify its maker? I wanted to do the same. The same with the flowers. I recognized the flowers by their fragrances, and I smelled them when I was half an hour away. I observed the grasses, the trees, the water, the rocks. I spoke with the rocks. The rocks have seen so much. I asked them, and they told me all the secrets of Kafsokalivia. And I was filled with emotion and contrition. I saw everything with the grace of God. I saw, but I didn't speak. I often went to the forest. I was greatly enthused by walking amidst the stones and the rushes, the thickets, and the tall trees. I fell in love with a nightingale, and it inspired me. One morning I was walking alone in the virgin forest. Everything, freshened by the morning dew, was shining in the sunlight. I found myself in a gorge. I walked through it and sat on a rock. Cold water was running peacefully beside me, and I was saying the prayer. Complete peace. Nothing could be heard. After a while the silence was broken by a sweet, intoxicating voice, singing and praising the Creator. I looked. I couldn't discern anything. Eventually, on a branch opposite me, I saw a tiny bird. It was a nightingale. I listened as the nightingale trilled unstintingly, its throat puffed out to bursting in sustained song. The microscopic little bird was stretched back its wings in order to find power to emit those sweetest of tones, and puffing out its throat to produce that exquisite voice. If only I had a cup of water to give it to drink and quench its thirst. Tears came to my eyes, the same tears of grace that flowed so effortlessly, and that I had acquired from old Demas. It was the second time I experienced them. I cannot convey to you the things I felt, the things I experienced. I have, however, revealed to you the mystery. And I thought, why does this tiny nightingale produce these sounds? Why does it trill like that? Why is it singing that exquisite song? Why? Why is it bursting its throat? Why? For what reason? Is it waiting for someone to praise it? Certainly not. No one there will do that. So I philosophized to myself. This sensitivity I acquired after the experience with old Demas. Previously, I didn't have it. What did that nightingale not tell me? And how much did I say to it in silence? Little nightingale, who told you that I would pass by here? No one comes here. It's such an out-of-the-way place. How marvelously you unceasingly carry on your duty, your prayer to God. How much you tell me and how much you teach me, little nightingale. My God, how I'm moved. With your warbling, dear nightingale, you show me how to hymn God. You teach me 1,000 things beyond number. My poor health does not allow me to narrate all this to you as I feel it. A whole book could be written about it. I loved that nightingale very much. I loved it, and it inspired me. I thought, why it and not me? Why does it hide from the world and not me? And the thought entered into my mind that I must leave. I must lose myself. I must cease to exist. I said to myself, why? Did it have an audience? Did it know I was there and could hear it? Who heard it as it was bursting its throat in song? Why did it go to such a hidden location? But what about of all these little nightingales in the middle of the thick forest, in the ravines, night and day, at sunset and sunrise? Who heard their throat-bursting song? Why did they go to such secret places? Why did they puff out their throats to bursting? The purpose was worship, to sing to their Creator, to worship God. That's how I explained it. I regarded all of them as angels of God, little birds that glorified God, the Creator of all, and no one heard them. Yes, believe me, they hid themselves so that no one would hear them. They weren't interested in being heard. But there in solitude, in peace, in the wilderness, in silence, they longed to be heard, but by whom? None other than by the Maker of everything, the Creator of all, by Him who gave them life and breath and voice. You will ask, did they have consciousness? What am I to say? I don't know if they did it consciously or not. I don't know. These, after all, are birds. It may be, as Holy Scripture says, that today they live and tomorrow exist no more. We mustn't think differently from what Holy Scripture says. God may present to us that all these were angels of God. We don't know about these things. At all events, they hid themselves so that no one would hear their doxology. So it is also for the monks there on the holy mountain. Their life is unknown. You live with your elder and you love him. Prostrations and ascetic struggles are part of daily life, but you don't remember them, nor does anyone ask about you. Who is he? You live in Christ. You belong to Christ. You live with everything, and you live God, in whom all things live and move, in whom and through whom. You enter into the uncreated church and live there unknown. And although you devote yourself in prayer to your fellow men, you remain unknown to all men, and perhaps they will never know you. I got it into my head to leave for the desert, alone with God alone. I got it into my head to leave, to ask my elder for his blessing and a sack of dry biscuit, and to disappear to praise and glorify God unceasingly. But I thought, where will I go? I still haven't learned my handicraft properly. They still hadn't taught me. Perhaps they were afraid I would leave. That was a widespread fear on the holy mountain. They wouldn't teach novices how to complete their handicraft so that they wouldn't leave. Because for a monk to know a craft, it means freedom, since he then has a way of buying his biscuit. So this idea got into my head to leave for the desert, alone with God alone, selflessly, without pride, without egotism, without vanity, without. Do you believe it? That's where my ideal of selflessness came from. A number of ascetics who disappeared into the desert achieved this purity, this perfection. They sought neither the world nor anything at all. They dissolved in tears before God and prayed for the church. They all were concerned first for the world and the church, and after that for themselves. So, as I said, the aim of the nightingale became stuck in my head. What is his aim in bursting his throat in song in the wilderness? Worship, praise, and doxology directed to God, the Creator. So why should I not go into the wilderness to worship God in silence, lost to the world and the society of men? Is there anything more perfect? All these ideas I had derived from the nightingale. I dreamt up such plans. How I would go into the wilderness, how I would live joyfully, how I would die. I would eat wild herbs. I would do this and that. I would go as an unknown ragged beggar to some monastery to ask for a rusk of bread, and I would eat it without saying who I am and where I stay. I made up a whole scenario. It was my secret. I returned to myself filled with all these emotions and dreams. I confessed them to the elder. The elder smiled. "Deception," he said. "Get it out of your head. Don't ever think of these things again, because such thoughts will put an end to your prayer. And as I have told you many times, whatever I confessed to the elder finished there and then, and I had a sudden feeling of joy. It was, it seems, the result of the elder's prayers. So I lived in obedience in the earthly paradise of the holy mountain. I never wanted to leave from there, but God's plan was different. God delivered me. It was a rainy day. When the rain stopped, we saw from the workshop where we were working many of the fathers from the other hermitages walking toward St. Nephan's to gather snails. Father Ioannikios saw the monks passing by. He became agitated. He wanted me to go and look for snails too. I said to him, "My elder told me not to go." I set out and he called me back. "But if you want me to go, I'll be obedient and go." "Go," he said. "There are lots of snails out today." So I grabbed a shoulder bag and ran off. Or rather, to begin with, I didn't run so that my elders wouldn't see me. But once I'd got out of sight, I started running. I climbed up high on some sheer rocks where not even the wild boars went, because when it rains, the wild boars all get together and go off to eat the snails. I collected snails for 3 hours. I found a great many and filled the bag full. I was covered in sweat, and as I was coming back down, by this time it was evening and the atmosphere had become chilly and damp. I was caught in a freezing wind that was blowing off Mount Athos, down to the sea. The bag on my shoulder was soaking wet, and my whole back was frozen by the saliva from the snails. As I was making my way down over difficult terrain, I had come down across a scree, a steep incline with small, loose stones. When I was halfway down, the whole scree started to give way, rushing like a river from the top of the mountain and carrying with it stones and rocks and everything in its wake. This river of stones was about 15 to 20 meters wide. My legs were buried up to my knees. I was stuck fast. With the sack still on my back and in danger of being killed, I shouted out, "Panagiamu, my holy lady!" All at once an invisible power threw me 20 meters across to the other side of the ravine onto some large rocks that in turn were on the point of rolling down the hillside. At the same moment down below, the fathers who were returning from St. Nephon's with their snails happened to be passing. They saw the treacherous landslide on the scree above, and they shouted out, "Look out! Is there anyone up there?" I was now out of danger and hadn't suffered any ill. Only my clogs had remained stuck in the landslide, and my legs were cut and bruised. The fathers shouted up again, but I didn't shout back. I wanted to shout, but I couldn't. I was in a state of shock. I heard them, but I didn't reply. The bag, which remained unharmed on my back, would have weighed over 100 kilos. When I recovered, I started to scramble from rock to rock until I reached the bottom. As soon as I had climbed down, I encountered another danger. I saw a snake beneath a galangale plant. I was terrified. God delivered me. I arrived back at the hermitage in a state of panic and collapsed. I told the elders all that had happened to me. I was in a state of shock. I told them about the landslide and the ravine, about my shoes that had been lost, about the cuts on my legs, and about the snake. The elder was very distressed and imposed a punishment on Father Ioannikios, forbidding him to celebrate the liturgy for many months. Father Ioannikios was also deeply distraught at what had happened. He kissed me on the forehead and we parted in tears. As a result of the cold I caught that day, I contracted pleurisy with a buildup of fluid and was in great pain. I had no strength, and I didn't want to eat. The elders sent for Father Antonios, a tall and very saintly monk from the hermitage dedicated to the Holy Fathers of Athos. He was often called in to act as a doctor. He came and saw me and then returned to his hermitage to fetch a kind of hide they call an ekdorion. He put this on my back, and all night it sucked the fluid from my back. The next day at about 10 o'clock he took a pair of scissors, sterilized them with alcohol, and cut away the hide that had filled up with fluid and had become like a pillow along with my skin. The pain was excruciating. I was greatly debilitated, and I fainted. When I recovered a little, I felt great joy because I was able to pray. I started to sing the words of the little canon of supplication. From the countless multitude of my sins, both my soul and body are now weakened and are both sick. When Father Ioannikios heard me, he came up to me and hugged me and kissed me on the forehead and said, "Forgive me, my boy." The elder came up and said to him fiercely, "Bah, you crooked fellow." I had no appetite. I didn't want to eat. I ate very little, and every day my condition worsened. It seemed that I was going to waste away and die. The elders were afraid I might die, and so was Father Antonios, who was acting as doctor. "The boy must leave," said Father Antonios. "He won't come through. He needs medicines that we don't have here. He's not eating, and it's certain that the longer he stays here, the worse he'll get." Just think that I ate a mouthful of ground almonds, and my stomach couldn't take them. Such was the extent to which I had weakened. My elders wanted me very much, but they found themselves obliged to send me out into the world, because on the mountain there was neither milk nor meat, and so they gave me permission to leave. They obtained the necessary papers for me to go back to my village for about 2 months until I would recover. And I left. Father Ioannikios took me to Daphne in a rowing boat. At that time we didn't have a motorboat at all. We didn't even have mules or motorboats then. Whatever the monks took up there, they carried on their shoulders on their backs. So we arrived in Daphne. I was unable to stand upright. They laid me down in a room where the post office was housed. After a short time, I started to have excruciating pains in the kidneys. I cried from the pain. Father Ioannikios wept too. For all my pain, I found strength to comfort him. "Don't cry, Yeronda, I'll get better. There's nothing the matter." And he comforted me through his tears, saying, "Don't cry, my boy. You'll get better." The boat arrived, and they carried me on board. He kissed me on the forehead, and we parted in tears. Evia, 1925 to 1940. Their hearts were softened, and without any external prompting they desired to observe the fasts, to enter the spiritual arena, and to come to know Christ. I had never imagined that I would return to the world. Kavsokalivia was my home. It is true that I had asked God to send me an illness, and he gave me an illness. But I said, "It's all very well, God, that you gave me the illness, but not that you take me away from the holy mountain." But take me away he did. I left because of my illness, or rather they sent me away. God indeed listened, but not necessarily to my will. He gave me also something I didn't want, because, as I said, on account of my illness, I left the holy mountain. And so, after so many years, I went back again to my home. I was in the boat for hours without end. Everything seemed strange to me. I hadn't seen little children and women for years. I went to my village via the town of Halkida. I passed through village after village and arrived at Agioionis, my village. First, I went over to Paravolia. I found someone, my brother-in-law to be precise, Nicholas, Eleni's father, and I asked him which families were in the village. He replied that a little way off was Leonidas Baraktaris, my father, and further down other families. And he mentioned their names. With my heart racing, I set out to meet my father. I hadn't seen him for many years. As I've told you, he'd been away in America for years. When I saw him, I recognized him at once. But how could he possibly recognize me, a monk with long hair and a great long beard? I felt embarrassed, and so I had hidden my hair and my beard inside the cassock I was wearing. Moreover, I was skin and bone as a result of my illness. I greeted him, and he said, "Who are you? Where are you from?" "I'm a monk," I replied. Then I asked, "Do you have any family? How many children do you have?" "I had 4, but one of my sons disappeared years ago. We lost him. He was working in Piraeus, and he disappeared." "In Piraeus? What was his name?" "Vangelis." "Vangelis? He used to be a friend of mine." "Tell me, do you know where he is?" "Alas, he died." "He died?" My father was heartbroken. He started to weep. I couldn't bear it. If I had been made of steel, I would have melted. I started to cry too. My heart was racing. I couldn't bear to see his father's heart so distressed. And I revealed myself to him. "It's me, Father, Evangelos." Imagine what took place at that moment. Joy and tears mixed together. We embraced, and full of emotion, we set out for the house to find my mother. My mother, however, was unforgiving. When she saw me, she scolded me mercilessly. She regarded it as a great affront that one of her children had become a monk. People came to see me. People learned about my homecoming. Various people would come to see me. I was a young man. Before I had become ill, I had been very ruddy and handsome. But my face did not have a worldly beauty. It was a godly beauty, And now that I was back in the world, everyone was commenting about me and about my hair. I hadn't cut my hair from the day that I had left for the holy mountain. My hair had grown and now reached below my waist. There was a great fuss in the village, so in order not to cut it, I boiled a pot of water, put my hair in it, and left it to boil for a long time. The hair was damaged and fell out. I was almost left bald. So, as I said, people would come to see me in the village. It was put about there that Leonidas Baraktaris' son, who had disappeared and had been given up for the dead, had returned from the mountain where he had been a hermit. People came to see me out of curiosity. I said nothing. I felt acutely embarrassed. I went to the church in the village. Everyone poked fun at me. My mother was ashamed. She wept and bewailed her fate. The poor woman couldn't bear to set eyes on me. She didn't want me and forced me to leave the house. To begin with, my aunt took me in. There I started to have good food, milk, cheese, eggs, and meat, to recover from my illness. But I couldn't stay there for long because I wanted, well, a different environment. What was I to do in the house? Moreover, I was embarrassed because I had done nothing for my family. How could I now ask them to look after me? When I felt better, I went straight back to the holy mountain. At a 4 or 5 hour walk from the village there was a monastery dedicated to St. Harlambos. One day I asked my father to take me there, not with a view to staying. I hadn't the slightest idea what I would find there or whether they would want me. In the meantime, we happened to meet a Father Yanis P. in Aliveri. He telephoned the bishop. At that time there was a telephone line from Aliveri to Kimni, and told him that a monk from the holy mountain had arrived. The bishop said to him, "Keep a hold on him, Papa Yanis. Don't let him leave us." The bishop of Kimni, Pantaleimon Fostenis, had a great affection for monks. My father took me and we set off. I went to kiss my mother's hand, but she pulled her hand away and wouldn't give it to me. My father then took me to the monastery of St. Harlambos. The abbot gave me a warm welcome. He liked me and spoke to me. When I told him of my difficulties, he said, "Stay here. We have eggs and milk, chickens, and everything." And so I stayed there. The abbot was so fond of me that he cooked special food for me. To begin with, I didn't have any appetite for food, but gradually I recovered. My father also stayed with me initially to look after me. My father was a cantor and had a good fortune to have been acquainted with Saint Nectarios. He had deep faith and was very devout. When I felt better, I went straight back to the holy mountain. My elders were overjoyed, but after 10 or 13 days, I suffered a relapse. I lost my appetite. I grew pale, lost weight, and became exhausted with a diet of vermicelli soup and such like. I had, you see, become seriously ill. Once again I obtained permission to leave and set off for the monastery of St. Harlambos. There I had eggs, cheese, butter, and so on, just as before. Once again I recovered and gained strength. After 3 months I returned once more to the holy mountain. 3 times I went and returned, but each time after 10 to 13 days I suffered a relapse. The 3rd time my elders said to me, "We have a responsibility for your health. We can't keep you. We love you and we want you, but God is showing that you must leave so that you don't die." Indeed, they added, "We love you, and if ever God grants you the possibility, and we believe that He will help you get well, and you wish to come here, then find another boy like yourself. We want you." And they sent me away. They said to me, "We're afraid the other monks will blame us if you were to die here. You're such a young lad. We don't like at all having to send you away, but we have no other choice. You see that we have exhausted what our love can offer. You've gone away and returned 3 times, and you haven't been able to make progress here." They gave me a blanket for the journey, which I have kept. It is my best blanket. It's the one I had in my cell. I made my prostrations on it. I slept on it, and I wrapped myself in it when I was standing to take a nap upright. That is, I slept awake. On the blanket I did all my spiritual exercises. And so I left the holy mountain for good. I went to St. Harlambos. All the people there wanted me. They were fond of me and were pleased that I had returned. Once again I started to eat milk, butter, and eggs. Let me tell you something important that I can remember. There was a monk on the holy mountain who was called Father Joachim, and he lived in the hermitage of St. Nilos. The monks who were in obedience to him are still alive. Now he wrote a letter to my mother and lambasted her severely, very severely. He wrote that even the wild beasts love their children. He wrote a lot, and fine things, certainly, but very pointed and harsh. And so my mother was really crushed. Later, however, she changed. She devoted herself to the church. When I was celebrating the liturgy, she would sit opposite me. She would cross her arms and pray. She was always looking at me. She didn't take her eyes off me at all. My priest, she would say proudly. In a certain village where I stayed for a short time after my ordination, they used to call her Papadia, or the priest's wife. They would kiss her hand, and she would glow with pride. I was with her when she died. I should have made all of my children monks, she used to say to me. I took it all very badly to begin with. I wish now all my children had become monks. Porphyrios III made me a priest. At the holy monastery of St. Harlambos, I lived as a monk, with the same tactics as before. I loved reading the lives of the saints, the poetic canons, and so on. I learned passages of the New Testament and prayers by heart. I had known the Psalter by heart for years. I knew all the Psalms. I was able to combine the different passages, and the Psalter was the food of my thought. As I said, I lived in the monastery as a monk, a little monk, with an old, worn-out raso, and I continued to go out at night and recite the Psalter because they didn't read it during the services in the monastery. I helped with the chores in the monastery. I was always on the move. They had given me the keys of the cheese-making workshop in the monastery because there were 2 or 3 elderly monks who needed help. All the dear monks there placed great trust in me, but while I was engaged in all the chores, I didn't let my mind wander. I kept a strict control on it. Or rather, I didn't keep a strict control on it. It's just that my thoughts were on my love. It's like a girl who, let's say, falls ill with pleurisy, yet her mind remains fixed unswervingly on her lover. Do you understand? The loved one, devotion to the lover, to Christ. I became a priest in the monastery there. And listen, and I'll tell you the story. The Bishop of Kimni, Photinis, was always at pains to support and lavish care on students and teachers of theology. At the time, there was a final-year theology student who had gone to stay in the bishop's accommodation while he was studying for his degree exams. Now, it was the bishop's habit to get a discussion going with all the monks on some spiritual topic during or after their meal in the refectory. Let me give you an example. The bishop would ask, "Tell me, which is the greatest virtue?" And then the monks would offer their opinions. There would be about 15 around the table. The topics were various, about scripture, religion, or monasticism. One evening when the discussion happened to center around monasticism, the bishop, he sighed heavily and he said, "Find me monks. There's nothing else I want. Good, faithful, and patient monks. Nothing else, just that. Then I can do wonders." At that point, the theology student jumped up. He was from Kokla, near Thebes, and he said to him, "Dearest bishop, you're crying out for monks, and yet there's a monk up at St. Harlambos who's pining away and you don't even know him." "Really?" exclaimed the bishop. "Yes, there's a poor young lad who's come from the holy mountain. He's very good, but he's very weak, skin and bone, and the abbot has him doing chores." "Well then, you'll go down there at once and bring him here to me." So he came down with a letter addressed to the abbot asking for Nikitas. That was what I was called then. It was my monastic name. I went at once to see the bishop, and when I met him, he put his hands on my head and said, "How are you, my boy?" We went and sat together, and he started asking me, "Where are you from? How did you get to be here?" And I told him in a few words how much I loved Christ and the ascetic life and how I had gone to the holy mountain as a boy. I explained to him how I had fallen sick and how my elders had sent me out into the world to recover. Well, what happened then? He summoned for me the best doctor in Kimni, who came and examined me and gave me a whole load of medicines. The bishop wanted me to stay there, but I was embarrassed to stay with the bishop. What I wanted was the forest, silence, and simplicity, and I returned to St. Harlambos. The bishop visited the monastery regularly, and the dear old man was very saintly. I recognized his saintliness with my charisma. One day he had come to St. Harlambos, and I heard him speaking, and I liked very much what he said. I had never heard someone preaching a sermon in my life. The bishop had established a charitable foundation which he called the Holy Order of St. Pantaleimon, and occasionally he would visit the monastery along with the children belonging to the order. On another occasion, the bishop came to the monastery along with the Archbishop of Sinai, Porphyrios III. It was then that they made up their minds to make me a priest. As you will understand, I didn't want to become a priest. I had learned that the right thing to do was to seek to remain as a monk and not to strive to become priest or bishop, and that when people started telling you to be ordained, you leave. That's what I knew. In the end, however, Porphyrios III made me a priest and gave me his name. I had fired him with enthusiasm. When we were talking a walk on the hills together, I revealed something very personal about him to him with my charisma, and he said to the bishop, "Make sure you don't lose him." At the time I was 20 years old. I didn't want to become a priest, but I couldn't avoid it. The bishop insisted so much, and the bishop is in the type of Christ. You can't continuously repudiate your bishop. You can't damage your relationship with your bishop. Otherwise, your prayers, they don't rise to heaven. They remain fruitless. And so they made me a deacon on the feast day of St. Paraskevi, and a priest on the day after, on the feast day of St. Pantaleimon. I heard confessions day and night nonstop. After 2 years, they made me a confessor. On a great feast day, when there were lots of people present, they took me to the bishop's residence, and they officially read the prayer for becoming a spiritual father. I was very young. What did I know about it? And foolish wretch, I was thick-headed into the bargain. I was still uneducated. I didn't know the penitential canons. And with incredible stupidity, what did I do? I bowed my head in obedience. Now I realize my folly. At the time I wasn't so aware of it. How the monks and lay people that came for confession loved me. I heard confessions there day and night nonstop. I started early in the morning, and I continued all through the day and throughout the night, and the next day and the next night, without interruption. I went 48 hours without eating. Fortunately, God took care of me and gave my sister the inspiration to bring me some milk to drink. There was a stairway with lots of steps leading up to the confessional, and the people would come up to make confession. They waited all night long for their turn. When they left, they would say to each other, "Now, there's a priest who's a knower of hearts." I remember they used the Albanian word for priests. I stayed there for 15 years. When they would come, I would ask questions. I would ask, "How old are you? Who do you live with?" One would say, "With my wife." Another would say, "With my parents." Another, "I live on my own." And then I'd continue, "What have you studied? What's your job? How long is it since you made confession? How long is it since you received Holy Communion?" And so on. And then, depending on what he said to me, I would speak to him a little. And because there was a queue waiting outside, I would say, "Well, what do you remember now, my child? What do you feel is weighing on your soul and your conscience? What transgressions have you committed? What sins?" And he would gradually begin to confess his errors, and I would help him along a little, having told him first that truly he must say everything just as he feels it. To begin with, when I first started to hear confessions, I used to really scald those who came to make confessions. I used to have at my side St. Nicodemus's Confessor's Guide, the Examogolatirion, and when someone would come for confession, if he confessed a serious sin, then I would look up the book and would see that it wrote not to receive Holy Communion for 18 years. I didn't know. I was inexperienced, and so I imposed the corresponding penance. Whatever the book said was law. But then the people would come back the following year. They would come from various places, from various villages, from far away and from near. And when I asked them, "How long is it since you made your confession?" they'd answer, "I confessed to you this time last year." Then I'd ask, "And what did I tell you?" They would, "You told me to do 100 prostrations every night." "And did you do them?" "No." "Why not?" "Well, you told me that I couldn't receive communion for 18 years. So I thought to myself, since I'm damned anyway, I might as well forget about the whole thing." You understand? Then another person would come and say the same thing. So I thought, what do I do now? It was then that I began to become a little wiser. The confessor has the power to bind and to loose. I remembered one of St. Basil's rules, and I took that as my basic guideline and changed my tactics in confession. The rule says, quote, "He who receives the power to bind and to loose, when he sees the great remorse of one of the sinners, let him reduce the time of the penance. Don't let him judge the penances in terms of time, but in terms of disposition," end quote. And so I started to encourage the people to read the poetic canons written in honor of the saints, to read short prayers, to make prostrations, matanyas, and to read Holy Scripture. And in that way they began to pay attention to the things of our faith. Their hearts were softened, and without any external prompting they desired to observe the fasts, to enter the spiritual arena, to come to know Christ. And one thing I've understood is that when someone comes to know Christ and to love him and is loved by Christ, everything thereafter proceeds well, in holiness and joy, and everything is easy. Before this magnificent vision, I knelt down as unworthy. I remember many incidents from my life at the monastery of St. Harlambos. Let me tell you about one of them. I've said before that I love the forest. I had become accustomed to solitude, and I wanted to be on my own. I wanted to live out of doors, especially at night. So I climbed up into an evergreen oak, more than 2.5 meters above the ground, and made myself a bed there out of the stems from a mastic shrub. I cut the stems and interwove them with the branches of the oak tree. I laid a blanket on top and wrapped myself in it. It was wonderful. I would climb a ladder that I made myself, and once I was up, I would pull up the ladder and no one would bother me. I had surrounded the bed with a wild clematis, and its plentiful blossom produced a delightful fragrance. Beneath the evergreen oak there was a thick mastic shrub. It grew 2 or 3 meters from the roots of the oak. I would scramble up onto the bed. Once there, I was all prayer. I was a monk of the holy mountain. What I desired was solitude and the Psalter, and also the Kyrie Jesu Christe, the Lord Jesus Christ. I would pray for hours up on the oak tree, surrounded by the flowers of the clematis and lying on my mastic bed. And one evening, when I had clambered up into this flowery bed, started to say my prayers. It was nighttime and in the midst of the wilds. The moon washed creation in its light. The nightingales, which had just woken up and had started to sing, accompanied me. I recited numerous verses from the Psalter, and most of all, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. At one point I stood upright and silently recited the office of Compline. When I began to say the prayer of the Mother of God, I brought before my mind an image of our All-Holy Lady, the most Theotokos on a glorious, divine, and elevated throne, and round about the orders of angels and archangels, the cherubim and the seraphim, the martyrs, the saints, the holy fathers, and the prophets. Before this magnificent vision, I knelt down as unworthy and began to say aloud, "Spotless, undefiled, incorrupt, immaculate, pure Virgin, Bride of God and Lady." Awe and trembling had seized me, when a ray of light emanating from our Holy Lady fell on my head, which I had bowed low in humility because of my unworthiness. As soon as I had finished the prayer to the Mother of God and fell silent, I heard a sound beneath the tree and saw a man emerge. He said to me, "Man of God, come down, I want to speak to you." I climbed down. He greeted me and said, "I'm very hungry." "I'll go and fetch you something," I said. "Listen and I'll tell you," he said. "I've come from America and I've killed my wife. They were hunting for me and I fled into the hills to avoid being arrested, but I'm dying of hunger." I went and brought him 3 prosphora. He explained to me that his wife had had a lover, and that when he had heard about it, he came back and did what he did. He had repented, but nevertheless, he had done it. I beg you, man of God, don't tell anyone about me, he implored, and disappeared into the darkness. When morning came, the police arrived looking for him. They asked me if I had seen anyone, and they described him to me. No, I replied, I saw nothing. What that man confessed to me happened through the grace of Our Lady. What I tell you is true. The most holy Theotokos was there before me, and sent her shining ray of light on me, a humble young monk, albeit a priest, about 21 years old. Come, and let's do a blessing of water. For a time I was appointed priest in the village in Evia. I'll tell you about one of the many incidents that took place there. One day a woman riding on the back of her donkey came toward the church where I was serving. As soon as she saw me, she dismounted and came up to me and said, "Papuli, my boy is sick." "What's the matter?" "He's lost his voice." "Has he been like this for long?" "Yes, he doesn't speak at all." The boy was about 18 years old. I took my priest stole, the Epitrakilion, and went down with her into the village. I arrived at her home. I saw the boy, who quite genuinely wasn't speaking. I said to her, "Come, and let's do a blessing of the water." She pulled across a chair and set a bowl of water and a towel on it. I started to read the service. The boy stood dumbly by. I finished the blessing and started to sprinkle the water around, singing, "Save, O Lord, your people." When I then touched the boy on the forehead with the cross and the spray of basil, he said to me, "Thank you very much." Thereafter that boy became very fond of me. Somewhat later he became a godfather to a little boy and gave the child the name Porphyrios. Afterwards he came and he said to me, "I've given your name to a little boy." "Did you ask me?" I retorted. "I love you," he said. "I wanted to give him your name." Listen to another similar story. This also happened in Evia. Once a woman came to me with her daughter. The daughter was dumb. The mother said, "Papuli, I'm very worried about my daughter. She hasn't spoken for a month." "What happened?" I asked her. "We had tied a goat up down by the stream, and there were lots of brambles there. And my daughter went down to fetch the goat. It was nighttime, and when she came back, she was dumb. I went and did a blessing of water for her. The mother, in fact, was the wife of a priest. I asked her, 'Which priest's your husband?' 'The priest from so-and-so.' 'Oh, your father Christos' wife?' 'Yes, Papuli.' So I read the blessing, and the priest's daughter recovered, through the grace of God, of course. I went to Vathia in Evia, to the monastery of St. Nicholas. After years had passed, and while I was still in Evia, I wanted to find a new place to collect my thoughts, like a hunted bird that wants to fly into God's embrace through prayer of the heart. I was alone and desolate. I went to Vathia in Evia, to the monastery of St. Nicholas, and I stayed there for 10 days. I had some tumble-down cells full of large mice. But what happened? For 2 days there was a great storm and heavy seas. It rained unceasingly, and the rain hammered on the walls and rattled against the windows as if it were hail. The wind howled furiously up in the huge plane tree. I heard its branches hitting against one another. The storm raged relentlessly there in the utter wilderness. All the elements of nature were roaring. And I was inside the poor, tiny, fresco-covered church of St. Nicholas, a church sanctified many times over years before by the souls which I saw and sensed were bending down before the saints and unlocking their hearts. There, in the wilderness in the cold north wind, I was like a hunted little bird of the air. Imagine, what would a little bird caught in such a storm have done? Wouldn't it have sought to find a little nest, some cave to hide in? I did the same amidst the uproar and the storm, terrified by the elements of nature. I ran to find refuge. I ran to hide myself in the embrace of my heavenly Father. I sensed the pleasant warmth of Christ, my union with God. I felt great joy and exaltation and relief, hiding myself away in God. I was unconcerned about the storm and the tempests, which are things of the world. My soul sought something higher, more perfect. I felt safe, comforted, and at rest. I spent golden days there. I took advantage of a spell of dreadful weather. And that's how we should always think. And that's how we should live through difficulties and tragedies. We should see them all as opportunities for prayer, for approaching God. That's the secret. How the man of God will transform everything into prayer. That's what St. Paul the Apostle means when he says, I rejoice in my sufferings, in all the tribulations he encountered. This is how sanctification takes place. May God grant this to us. I ask for this fervently in my prayer. I stayed for a considerable time, 3 whole years, in the monastery of St. Nicholas. I left just before the Italian invasion of Greece in 1940. The Polyclinic Hospital in Athens, 1940 to 1973. Blessed years, devoted to the sick and to the suffering. I lived there for 33 years as if it were a single day. On the declaration of war, I came to Athens. I was appointed chaplain to the chapel of St. Gerasimos in the Polyclinic in Athens, exactly at the time war was declared in 1940. I had a strong desire to work in a hospital. God fulfilled this desire, and to my great joy, I was appointed priest in the chapel in the Polyclinic in Athens. Since I have acquired the habit of always telling you about some event from my life, how I experienced it and how I felt about it, listen, and I'll tell you the story from the beginning. Once, when I was in the skeet of Kafsokalivia, I heard the interpretation of the Sunday Gospel by Nikephoros Theotokis being read out in the Kyriakon. Theotokis emphasized how much good a person can do when he comforts souls that are in pain, people who are suffering from cancer, leprosy, and tuberculosis. When I heard this, I was deeply moved and filled with enthusiasm. The reader was reading in a very animated way, and moreover, I always got inspired by everything. And I started to dream. If only I had been educated and knew how to preach, then I could go to a hospital, a leper hospital, or a sanatorium for tuberculosis. Such approximately were my thoughts. And when I desired something, I wanted to experience it. Whenever I had a strong desire to go to the desert, I would make myself experience the desert wherever I was. It was a vain fantasy, but nevertheless, I experienced it. I would have the sensation, for example, that I was up in Carmelion above Kerasia, where the church of St. Basil is, the most peaceful place on the holy mountain. And I had the sensation that I was a hermit, and I fantasized, that's how I'll read, that's how I'll light my lamp, that's how I'll say the prayer, Lord Jesus Christ. I'll do so many prostrations, and I'll eat dry rusks and wild herbs. And I made my dream a reality. Vain fantasy. But nevertheless, I satisfied myself briefly in that way, and then the thought would go away. And at times of weakness, and it's at times of weakness that we give rein to thoughts that are not so good, I would think of such things that my soul desired, and I would experience them. That's how I lived at that time. I went to an island with lepers, and I spoke to the lepers. I celebrated the liturgy there and looked after them and helped those who were severely disabled, and I lived in my fantasy with the lepers. All this was then forgotten. It happened, however, that I myself became ill, and 3 times my elders dispatched me back to the world to get well. But I failed to recover, and in the end, as I've told you, they gave me their blessing to live outside the holy mountain in a place where there would be milk and eggs and meat and all the things that were required for my illness. For that reason, I went to the monastery of St. Harlambos in Evia and stayed there for about 15 years. Then I started to be deluded again by the ideas that I had on the holy mountain, namely to go and work in a sanatorium. I thought of going to Penteli. An acquaintance of mine had told me that there was need of a priest there. The sanatorium in Penteli at the time was full of people suffering from tuberculosis. I went to the doctor of the hospital, and he told me, "We've just appointed someone, Father. We've just got ourselves a priest." I told him about my yearning to work in a sanatorium, and he said to me, "Yes, I understand. I had the same aspiration, and God brought me here." I then went down to Athens, and there I met a priest from the Holy Mountain, who was serving in the Church of the Holy Cross at Stavros in the Spada area. I confided to him, "Father Matthew, This is what I long to do. How should I go about it? Listen, I'll tell you, he said. I was asked to go to a hospital, to the polyclinic in Athens, but I didn't accept. I preferred to come here to Stavros. Would you like for me to speak to Professor Amilkas A. and ask if they'll take you there? Let's go and see, I said. I went and I saw, and oh my goodness, what crowds of people and hustle and bustle. I wouldn't be suitable for this place, Father Matthew, I exclaimed. Why wouldn't you be suitable, he retorted. And so we went to Professor Amilkas A. and spoke to him. Father Matthew left, and the professor said to me, come back tomorrow. I went the next day, waited for the professor at his home. The maid showed me into the lounge, and I waited for him to arrive because he'd gone out. I took out my New Testament, which I had in pocket edition, and started to read so as not to waste my time. When the professor appeared, I closed the book. He came toward me, I greeted him, and he said, Hey, what book was that, Father? The New Testament, Professor, I replied. Have you studied theology? No, I said. What education do you have? The first class of primary school, and I didn't learn much there. What I have by way of education I learned in the desert and the holy mountain in Kapsokalivia. I had 2 elders I lived with. Can you sing? Yes, I can sing. I've got a church, but I don't have a priest, he said. I'm constantly finding priests, and then they always leave. I don't know, Professor, you must decide. I have a desire to serve in a hospital. It's a desire I've had from the time I was in the desert. When I had the desire then, I had no intention of leaving the holy mountain. Honestly, I never really thought of leaving the holy mountain to work in a leper hospital, but because I liked the idea when I heard it, I wanted to experience it, and I experienced it in my fantasy. However, God has now granted me the possibility, and I can now make the thing of a fantasy a reality. He asked me, what bishop have you been under? I replied, the Bishop of Kimni. The professor then went through to another room and telephoned the Diocese of Kimni. As I learned later from the bishop's chancellor, Spiridon, who happened to be present when the professor called, the bishop had responded saying, Excellent. The polyclinic has found its priest at last. Amilkas returned and said to me, We must go and have you celebrate the liturgy. I replied, I can't celebrate the liturgy, Professor, because I'm afraid. I can't celebrate without the permission of the archdiocese. That's my business, he responded. Your business is to celebrate the liturgy. But we must have permission from the archdiocese, I insisted. No, he said. You will celebrate and we won't ask for permission. I wasn't happy, but in the end I gave in. He got me to celebrate the liturgy every day in the chapel of St. Gerasimos in the polyclinic. We'll appoint you as priest, he said at last. And so it was. But what happened then? There was an archimandrite, a graduate in divinity who had studied in London, who wanted to be a priest at St. Gerasimos', but in the meantime Professor Melchus had appointed me. The priest in question was most annoyed. He had spoken about it to Father Gervasos P., the chancellor of the archdiocese, and had been promised the post. But when they learned that I was serving there, and so Father Gerasimos summoned me to the archdiocese. As soon as he saw me, he started to vent his fury. I'll send you into exile, he shouted. What on earth did you think you were doing? Are you really so ignorant? Don't you know that you have to have the permission of the local bishop? He really ranted and raved. I went to the professor and told him, the chancellor really pulled me over the coals. Come this way, he said, and he took me up to the archbishop. At that time it was Chrysanthos of Trapezunta. It was 1940 at the start of the Albanian War, and his beatitude asked me, what education do you have? Your beatitude, I answered. I'm not educated. I learned to read in the desert. How long did you attend school? Only 1 year, primary school. He looked at the professor wryly. What can we do, Professor, he said. It's the center of Athens, there in Ammonia Square. People will think we're mad. Not at all, said Amilkas. He's the priest I want. He's the man for the job. How's it to be done? Queried the archbishop. His beatitude then turned to me and asked, Do you know how to sing? I've learned in a practical sort of way. Listen, my child, he said to me, this is a post that needs an educated person, a priest who's able to preach, because that area is a center of vice and corruption, and there must be someone who can speak and teach the people. Nevertheless, the professor wants you. So what I would say is this: you're not educated, but at least try to maintain a dignified bearing. And I would even go so far as to say that perhaps your manner is better than that of someone with a formal theological education who would preach to people with fine words. With your blessing, your beatitude, I replied. And so it was. I bowed to take his blessing and left. The professor stayed behind with the archbishop. The next day we had a liturgy. I found myself once again in hot water, because it happened that we had a memorial service. Father Gervasios learned about this too and was angered that I had done the memorial service because this was not allowed without a written letter of appointment. A long story. All these things, however, didn't unduly upset me. I got over them. The thing I couldn't get over was the thing I'll tell you about later. I loved the Church of Saint Gerasimos and the patients very much. I didn't forget anyone. I visited all the patients. After the Divine Liturgy, I went round all the wards. And when I didn't have a Divine Liturgy in the morning, I would hear the confession of those who were waiting and then go visit the sick. I lived there for 33 years as if they were a single day. I had a joyous, carefree life. I was so unknown and inconspicuous there in the polyclinic that when I was very tired at midday and had lots of work in the evening, I wouldn't go home but would stay there and no one would pay any attention to me. I hid myself away in a little anteroom, lined up chairs in a row and lay face down on them so that I wouldn't be cold, and I slept a little and no one noticed me. I hadn't opened myself up to any socializing, and so I was very much disregarded. I was uneducated, insignificant, and poor. Other people were in charge of the administration of the chapel. I knew nothing. And yet I lived there for 33 years, blessed years devoted to the sick and to the suffering. It was put about that I was a good confessor, and so many came for confession. Many broken and crushed souls came to pour out heartfelt tears before St. Gerasimos, and with what faith they would make confession. As I've told you, I've been hearing confession for more than 50 years. I would let the person making confession speak at length about whatever he wanted, and at the end I would say something. While he was talking away, and not only about personal matters, I would observe what his soul was like. From his whole attitude, I understood his state, and at the end I would say something to be of benefit to him. And even the things that weren't of a personal nature nevertheless had some kind of relation to him, to the state of his soul. And all the people who came for confession were very happy with me because I didn't speak to them, and they said freely whatever they wanted to. And if there was someone who had a little connection with the church, or who mentioned to me some transgression of a somewhat more serious nature, I didn't draw attention to the matter particularly. If you make someone acutely aware of his fault, this provokes a reaction in him that makes him unable to give it up later. And at the end of the confession, I would say something about the serious fault that he had made an effort to bring him to confess. Thus I didn't show complete indifference, nor did I emphasize it. It depended on the circumstances. I might even on occasion display indifference. At the end I would say, "My child, for everything you've said, the Lord has forgiven you. Take care from now on, and be sure so that the Lord will strengthen you. And then after so many days, go and receive Holy Communion." And so I wouldn't emphasize the specific fault. This is very important. Besides, the person is not exclusively responsible for his mistake. Amid the hustle and bustle of Ammonia Square, I lived as if in the desert of the Holy Mountain. Amid the crowds, the people, and the hubbub of Ammonia Square, I raised up my hands to God, and I lived interiorly as if in the desert of the Holy Mountain. I would say to myself, I'm not cut out for being in the world. I'm made for the desert. In the desert, whatever you do, no one knows you. And yet I lived in the world. I stayed there where God had brought me. I loved everyone. I felt pain for everyone, and everything moved me. This is something that divine grace had given me. I saw the nurses in their white uniforms, like alb robe-wearing angels, coming down to the church, and tears came to my eyes when I saw them. I loved the nurses very much, and when I saw a nurse in uniform, I thought of her as a sister of mercy, a sister of love, on her way to celebrate a liturgy in the temple of the love of God in the hospital, serving the sick. An angel, a robed angel. How many things we pass over unnoticed. Again, when I saw a mother breastfeeding her baby, I was moved. When I saw a pregnant woman, I wept. I saw the primary school teachers taking their pupils to the church, and I shed tears at their work of love. The greatest delight for me, of course, was the time of the Divine Liturgy. When I was reading, the congregation held its breath. I was carried away. I celebrated in a very devoted manner because I loved to celebrate the liturgy. But the people were also inspired by the simple way I celebrated. Because I was uneducated, I made great efforts. Highly educated people used to come and sing at the church of St. Gerasimos. Many of them were university professors, such as the Alvisatos brothers, Leonidas P., the professor of comparative religion, and many others. Next to the polyclinic was the Athens Odeon, the music school. The teachers from the school would also come to the church along with their families. The church choir was from the Royal Theatre. It was different for me, however, to keep in harmony with all the different church tones. So I decided to attend classes at the Odeon. I didn't waste any hours left at my disposal. I went and learned music with perseverance and zeal for hours on end. I did it to make things easier for the singers. I didn't want to upset the church choir. And it was, as I said, a choir of a professional standard. I wanted to be sure to intone confidently on the right note so that I wouldn't be tiresome and irritating to them. So I was obliged to go to the Odeon to learn music. But listen to my madness. I wanted to learn to play the harmonium, and I had an ulterior motive. When I would set up a monastery, my intention was for us to have a harmonium in the guest house, the official reception room, the akandariki, so that when we were there and we would talk about various teachings or discuss some fine topics among ourselves, we would have the harmonium and we would use it to accompany our singing. The Odeon, however, did not have a harmonium, and so they offered me the piano. I therefore learned the piano, but the instrument I liked was the harmonium. How God arranges everything. The staff in the Odeon were fond of me, and they gave me a teacher who was truly saintly. One day when I was celebrating, I had been given a fine communion loaf. And what more precious gift was there at that time during the German occupation when we were starving? I took it to my teacher and said to her with a smile, "I've been given a fine communion loaf." No, she said, "there's no way I can eat it." "Please take it," I implored. "No," she said, "it's not right." I felt embarrassed. I sat down at the keyboard and she gave me the lesson. At the end I said to her, "I feel bad about this," and the dear woman took the loaf. But I didn't want to upset her at all about the lesson, so what did I do? When I finished my modest prayer at night, until I fell asleep, I would arrange my hands as if on a piano, and then I would go over the lesson in my head, C, B, A, G, 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 E, and that's how I learned the lesson. Why did I do it? So as not to upset my teacher. That was something that I had learned on the Holy Mountain. I am incapable of upsetting someone because from my earliest age I learned to be obedient. This has caused me to make not a few mistakes in my life. When I see someone upset and pressuring and imploring me to do or say something, I feel sorry for them, and I do it even if I don't want to. To begin with, when I was appointed there, I experienced a great temptation. I haven't told you yet, however, that to begin with, when I was appointed a priest in the polyclinic, I experienced a great temptation. But God helped me. On the first Sunday, I went to celebrate the Divine Liturgy full of joy. My desire to work in a hospital was about to be fulfilled. God had given me this gift. But what happened to me? Just as I was about to begin, I heard the noise of a gramophone blaring out love songs from just outside the church. I love you, and so forth. I started the service. The noise boomed on unabated. I read the prayers, the Divine Liturgy. Outside, the crooning continued relentlessly. Inside, the church was full of people. I came to the holy doors and said, "Peace be to all." But the liturgy was far from peaceful. When I finished in a state of despair, I consumed the holy gifts, took my vestments, folded them, and went out at once. Opposite the church was a shop that advertised gramophones and gramophone records. I went politely to the shop owner, Mr. Coritas, that was his name, and I asked him if possible to switch off the record player at least during the Divine Liturgy. "I've got to earn my living," he replied. "There's no way I can do what you want. I've got children to look after and rent to pay." "Please," I insisted. "It's distracting for me and it's not right." "Mind your own business," was his response. What was I to do now? I thought about leaving the church and looking for another one. But I felt under an obligation because I'd been given the post even though I didn't have the formal qualifications. I didn't have a primary school leaving certificate or even a report card from one of the classes. What would I say to the Archbishop who had done me the favor of giving his consent? What would I say to the professor who had done his utmost to have me appointed? I became deeply depressed. I sat in the sanctuary and thought, what would I do? I said to myself that I would have to leave. I couldn't stay any longer. How could I live in there? How could I celebrate the liturgy? Especially as someone who had come from the desert, from complete and utter silence, total Hezekiah. How could I endure such a satanic noise? All the buses from Nicadia, from all the villages and from Piraeus passed in front of the church door, and you would hear the constant sound of their horns hooting as they went up and down. I resolved to leave, but how would I announce it? I returned home dejected. I didn't know what to do. At the time, I was living in the Lykavitas district in Doxapatri Street. I went back there and racked my brains. I didn't even want to eat. What was I to do? I had been so overjoyed that I had found a post in a hospital that I would see sick people and I would be able to look after them, to talk to them, to hear their confessions, and to give them Holy Communion. Now what? Only God could extricate me from this difficult situation, and so in answer to the dreadful problem I was facing, I said to myself, whatever God says. My God, I said, I don't want you to speak to me. I don't want you to show me a sign, but with your own love reveal to me something simple that will enable me to know whether I should stay or leave. Something very simple. I'm not asking for some miracle. I'm ashamed to. And so I decided to fast for 3 days without even putting water in my mouth, praying in complete silence and waiting for an answer from God. And the answer came. While I was in the chapel of St. Gerasimos, various people came in to light a candle. At one point, a woman came in with her child. The boy would have been in the first year of secondary school. He was carrying his school books with him. One of them was his physics textbook. I asked him if I could have a look at it because I was always curious to learn something new. As I was leafing through it, I lighted on a page showing the following experiment. If you throw a small stone in a calm lake and you see the water making ripples over a small area, if you then throw a larger stone, the ripples become larger and extend over a larger area so that they outflank the first ripples. At that moment, I received the answer to my dilemma. It was divine illumination. I reasoned as follows. The small ripples from the singing outside the church can be outflanked by the prayers of great spiritual intensity that are being said inside the church. And at the same time, there came at once inside my mind forcefully, very forcefully, and if you celebrate here and have your mind on God, who can cause you any harm? So I prepared myself to do just this, to abandon myself completely to Christ's love, to execute with great zeal and spiritual intensity the drama of the Divine Liturgy, the awesome drama of Golgotha. My joy was very great. I believed that God had found the solution for me. On the Sunday morning, I arrived at the church full of hope. I gave the blessing to begin. My mind was focused solely on the divine worship. I felt that I was in heaven as well as on earth, and with me was the congregation, God's flock, initiates in the mystery of his word. I felt that we were all embraced by divine grace. Outside, the gramophone was blaring furiously. I heard nothing. For the first time, I experienced a divine liturgy like that. It was the most beautiful of my life. And from then onwards, all the divine liturgies were the same. I wanted to learn everything in all its depth and breadth. I experienced a great many things during the years I was at the polyclinic. Greece, and especially Athens, was suffering from the hardships of the war and the occupation, the starvation and death that carried people away every day. I shared with them the communion loaves, the prosphora, whatever else they brought me. But even more, the anguish in their souls made me suffer with them, as I saw into the depths of their souls with the gift of clear sight. Whenever someone came and told me about a bodily pain, I made it a matter for prayer. This fact also incited me to study. When I saw a sick part of the body, I wanted to know its scientific name and the position of all the organs in the human body, the bile, the pancreas, and so forth. And so I bought medical textbooks on anatomy, physiology, and so forth in order to study and to understand. For a time, indeed, I attended classes at the medical school to acquire a fuller knowledge. My thirst for learning extended to all fields. I wanted to learn everything in all its depth and breadth. If I visited a factory, I wanted to learn every detail about how it operated. If I visited a museum, I would spend hours examining the sculptures. I'll tell you about one incident I remember. One Sunday afternoon, I was passing the archaeological museum, and since I had some free time, I decided to go in. I walked through the rooms looking at the statues. In one of the rooms, there was a group of people with a guide who was explaining things to them. There was complete silence. I went toward them. When the guide saw me, however, she whispered to me, "A priest's just come in. I can't stand priests, but this one doesn't seem to be like the others." I came up closer and said, "Good afternoon." "Good afternoon," replied the guide. "May I listen to what you're saying?" I asked. "Of course," she said. We went from one statue to another. At one point, we stood before a statue of Zeus. Zeus was on his throne and was in the act of hurling a thunderbolt at mankind. Once the guide had finished telling them what she knew, she turned to me and said, "What do you have to say about this, Papuli? How do you see the statue?" "I don't know about these things," I said, "but as I see it, I marvel at the work of the artist and also at the human form, such a perfect divine creation. And I see that the artist who made it had a great sense of the divine. Look at Zeus. Although he's hurling his thunderbolt at mankind, yet his face is serene. He's not angry, he's impassionate." The guide, and indeed the whole group, was very pleased with my explanation. What does that tell us? It tells us that God is without passion, even when he punishes. I had a great thirst for knowledge about everything, as I said. I once went to study poultry farming, and truly. Another time, I went to a teacher who taught me beekeeping. The teacher was from Corfu. There were various people in the class, boys and girls, young and old, and when the lesson was over, the teacher came up to me and said, "Do you know what I've realized, Father? I can see that you'll be very successful as a beekeeper." "How did you realize that?" I asked. "From the way you look, from your attentiveness. I saw that you'll make a good beekeeper. You'll do very well. You'll understand the bees. You'll talk to them, and they'll talk to you." "That's quite right," I said. "I'll talk to the bees. I'll go up to the hive. I'll listen to them. I'll understand them. I'll be delighted with them. But I'll lose my cassock and my priest's hat." I wanted to be an ascetic, even in the middle of Athens. My main work all those years, since I became a spiritual father, has been confession. Hours without end, days and nights without a break. I would hear confession, whether I was in St. Harlambos in Evia and St. Gerasimos or St. Nicholas in Cilicia, or now here in the monastery. Even when I had my illness, and there were very many and they lasted for years, I received with Christ's love the souls that God sent me. I wanted to be an ascetic, even in the middle of Athens. And so I hid myself in the Turkovunia hills. I lived there with my parents, my sister, and my niece in a shack made of breeze blocks. At night we worked in silence and in prayer. We had knitting machines, and we knitted vests and pullovers, and we sold them. Our aim was to build a monastery with the money that we set aside. We also made incense, precious incense. It was of my own invention, with my own recipes, with my own concoctions, with 50 aromatic substances. I recognized the various incenses and their acidity by the fragrances. I had filled a jotter with my recipes, a jotter filled with recipes, with which I made up fragrances for the incense. I put all the aromatic substances I had in a row, about 50 bottles in all. Rutanol, renanol, and so forth. And strangely, I knew all these bottles. I knew the fragrance of each one and its intensity and its acidity. I knew that if I needed 10 parts of the one from the other, I needed 2 or 3 or 1. And I made up some very fine, rare recipes. I had them all written down in a jotter, as I told you, but it was stolen. I know who stole it from me, but I don't want to say. That I can't say. I was very simple. I was very simple and without worldly knowledge and without knowledge of social etiquette. I didn't know how to behave because I had grown up on a mountainside. I'd spent a little time with my godfather in Piraeus, but I looked after myself there. The girls brought me food, and I ate on my own and slept up in the attic. So I didn't know how to hold a fork or a spoon at the table. Listen, and I'll tell you something. I didn't generally go where I was invited, but once I was called to read a prayer for a sick woman who worked next to the polyclinic near the town hall, a very fine, devout woman. But by the time we got to her house and read the prayers, it was late, and they insisted that I would stay and eat with them. No, I said, I'm afraid I can't. I've got to leave. The woman's husband said, We'll be very offended if you don't stay, because we know you haven't eaten. We'll be very upset if you leave, Father. Do us the honor. We've got our little daughter, too. They had a little girl. They hadn't been married long. A lovely little girl, and so I accepted. I said the grace, blessed the food, and we began to eat. But their little daughter, seeing how I was eating, exclaimed, Mama, he's not holding his spoon properly. Hush, hush now, hush, they said. But hushed she wasn't. He's not holding his spoon properly. What an embarrassment. I looked at how they were holding their spoons and did likewise. Then they gave me something to eat with a fork. At once the little one piped up, He's not holding his fork properly. Alas and alack. You see how simple I was? St. Gerasimos' walking stick. The place where we lived in the Turkovunia was on a very steep incline. I would get up very early in the morning, set off for the church for St. Gerasimos', and would return late in the evening. The road outside our house was very tricky and descended very abruptly. One morning I fell down and broke my leg. It was Sunday morning. The sun hadn't risen above the horizon, and all was quiet. So some people heard my groans of pain and came out and called an ambulance. The ambulance came and took me to the hospital. I had broken my left leg at the shin. All the bones had been shattered. The pain was excruciating. When they got me to the polyclinic, they took me out of the ambulance and put me on a bed. The doctors decided to put my leg in plaster. The people in the church were waiting for me to go and celebrate the liturgy. In the end, they all had to leave. After 2 weeks, during which I had been lying in bed while I was praying, I happened to cast a glance at my leg. With the grace of God, I saw that they had set my leg wrongly in the plaster, so I asked the doctors to remove the plaster. The consultant who heard about it said with a laugh, Instead of looking after the church for which he's responsible, that priest wants to criticize us, even though everything's been done properly and his leg's been x-rayed. What does he want now? Does he want to waste our time? Nobody showed any interest. I insisted on them looking at my leg. They paid no attention. When they brought me food at lunchtime, I didn't eat it and said that I demanded they take me for an x-ray. I insisted on this because the leg would heal askew and would stay like that for good. The consultant sent me a message. Tell him to occupy himself with his priestly duties. His leg's perfectly fine. Evening came, and again they brought me food, and again I didn't eat, insisting that they take a look at my leg. The next morning the consultant came by and said irately, "What's all this nonsense, Papa? Are you trying to waste our time in here?" In the end, they took me down to the x-rays. They saw that they had indeed set my leg askew, and what's more, it had healed. The consultant started to laugh. "Poor Papa," he said. "You must be a real sinner. Now I realize it too. Now you'll see what you have to go through. We'll have to break your leg again and reset it properly." They started to hammer the plaster to break it. I said nothing, but only prayed silently. "So you're not saying anything now," he said to me. "But now I'm going to forgive all your sins." With a sudden movement, they pulled and removed the plaster. I was in great pain. 2 doctors held my leg, and the consultant started punching my shin in his fist to break it. "Now you'll see, Papa. I'll forgive all your sins, and all my own will be forgiven as well." They set about breaking the bone. It had already healed a little, and I was in unbearable pain. I bit my lip. In the end, they broke it. They laid me down once again under the x-ray, pulled my leg, and brought it out onto its axis. Then they carefully put on the plaster and sent me back to my bed. For 2 or 3 months, I can't remember exactly, I remained stretched out in bed. And they got me to sit up and gave me 2 crutches to walk with. I didn't want them, and the consultant said to me, "Take them to stand up because you've been lying down so long." I didn't use the crutches for long because I was soon able to keep my balance on my own. I was wary of the crutches in case I would get used to them and wouldn't be able to do without them. Then the consultant said to me, "Be sure to buy a walking stick." "No," I said, "I don't need one." "You're a priest," he said, "and yet you're so disobedient. Listen to me, otherwise you'll fall and break your bones." So I was obliged to ask my sister, "Would you buy me a walking stick? We're poor, but you'll have to get me a walking stick so that I can get rid of these crutches." It was 11 o'clock in the morning. I went on the crutches to the hospital chapel. My sister got ready at once to set off to Aeolus Street to buy a walking stick. Just as she was about to leave, a woman holding a walking stick in her hand entered the church. "Is this St. Gerasimos here?" she asked. "Yes, dear, this it is," answered the lady who acted as a caretaker. "Where's the icon of the saint?" "Over there," she said, pointing to the icon. The unknown visitor knelt down before the icon of the saint and with tears in her eyes started to address the saint out loud in such a way that we could all hear. "Dear saint, I didn't know you. I've never heard of you. I hadn't even heard your name. And yet you did me the honor of visiting me, and you asked me to bring the walking stick I had bought in Jerusalem to your house. And here I've brought it to you, my dear saint. You said, 'I want you to bring me the walking stick tomorrow morning.' I didn't know where you were, but I asked, and now I've found you." I was sitting with my sister and the caretaker in the seats next to the candle bench. The woman approached us and said, "What's all this about? Why did the saint ask for my walking stick? What does he want it for?" The caretaker replied, "Listen, and you'll see why the saint wants your walking stick. He doesn't need it himself, but the saint has a servant, and his servant is this priest here that you see. He's broken his leg, and he's been suffering dreadfully for months. Today is the first day he's out of bed, and the doctors have told him to get a walking stick. And look, his sister was just about to go to Aeolus Street to buy him a walking stick. Come then, take the walking stick from the saint and give it here to his servant." The woman, overcome with emotion, brought me the walking stick and kissed my hand. "Take it, Father," she said, "and forgive my sins. I bought it in Jerusalem. It's from the Holy Sepulchre. I come from Probona district at the bottom of Patia. That's where I live. I saw the saint there in my sleep. I thanked her. I took the walking stick and, setting aside my crutches, used it at once. I called it St. Gerasimos' walking stick and was very fond of it. I take care of it so that I don't lose it. It's very miraculous. When someone has a pain somewhere, I tap the painful spot a little with the walking stick and they get better. It's truly miraculous. Can you believe it? The saint took care of someone as insignificant as myself. He appeared as large as life to the woman who had heard neither of St. Gerasimos nor of me. The saints worked the most incredible miracles. That's why we must honor them. And I venerate St. Gerasimos, who with his saintliness and grace is the staff of the sick. He reigns on the righteous and the unrighteous. Many people would come to the church of St. Gerasimos in the polyclinic to light a candle. Some would stay for confession. Others took a blessing, while others would light their candle, make the sign of the cross, and leave. People of every kind would come, men and women, young and old, educated and uneducated. People of all walks of life lived in the Ammonia area. On the Feast of Theophany, after the great blessing of the water, it was the custom to go around and bless people's homes by sprinkling the holy water. One year I also went and did the blessing. I would knock on the doors of the flats, and when the door was opened, I would enter singing, "When in Jordan you were baptized, O Lord." As I was going down Maison Street, I saw an iron gate. I opened it and entered the courtyard, which was full of mandarin, orange, and lemon trees, and walked toward the stairway. It was an outside stair that went up to the first floor and also down to a basement. I went up the stair, knocked at the door, and a woman appeared. When she opened the door for me, I started, as usual, to sing, "When in Jordan you were baptized, O Lord." She stopped me abruptly. In the meantime, however, my voice had been heard, and the girls started coming out of their rooms from the right and the left of the corridor. "I see what's happened," I said to myself. "I've stumbled on a house of ill fame." The woman stood in my way, barring my entrance. "Go away," she said to me. "It's not right for these girls to kiss the cross. Let me kiss the cross, and then please go away." I assumed a serious and reprimanding attitude and said to her, "I'm afraid I cannot leave. I am a priest and I've come to bless the house." "That's all very well, but there's no way these girls can kiss the cross." "But how do we know who should kiss the cross, the girls or you? Because if God were to ask me who should be allowed to kiss the cross, I might reply that the girls should kiss the cross and not you. Their souls are in a better state than your own." She blushed for a moment. So I said, "Let the girls come and venerate the cross." I signaled to the girls to come forward and started to sing, "When in the Jordan you were baptized, O Lord," with even greater gusto than before, because I felt a sense of joy that God had so arranged things for me to come to these souls. They all kissed the cross. They were all immaculately turned out with their colorful skirts and so on. I said to them, "Blessings on you all, my children. God loves all of us. He's very good and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. He's the Father of us all and is concerned for each one of us. Only we too must try to come to know him and to love him and to become good. Love him, and you'll see how happy you'll be." They looked at me with puzzlement, but something remained in their troubled little souls. "I'm delighted that God granted me the honor of coming here today to bless you," I said to them as I turned to go. "Blessings on you for many years." "For many years," they replied, and I left. The prayers were most magnificent. On various occasions, apart from the Feast of the Theophany, I'd be asked to go and do a blessing in the homes, and once during the time of the German occupation, a representative of the Red Cross came to the polyclinic to take me to do a service of blessing. "You'll have to go and get a priest from St. Constantine's," I said. "The house belongs in that parish." "No," he replied categorically. "You're the priest who's to come. There's a reason for it, and willy-nilly you'll come along with me to the 3rd September Street." And so submissively I went along with him, taking with me the cross, my monastic headgear, and my good cassock. When we arrived, I was taken aback. I found myself face to face with a company of highly sophisticated ladies and gentlemen, including the chancellor of the university who taught philosophy. I think was his name Bais. As soon as I entered the room, I introduced myself confidently and shook hands with everyone. But I, an unlettered soul, had failed to bring a prayer book with me. When I saw the people dressed in finery and the platters piled with choice sweets at the time of the occupation, I started to quiver with nervousness. "Let's do the service of blessing," I said to them. I put on my outer cassock, donned my monastic veil, and took the cross in my hand. I started the service without a book, and summoning up courage, I began to say the prayers clearly and distinctly, word by word. As I progressed, the words began to flow more confidently, but I kept my gaze fixed on the bowl of water in front of me. "Peace be to all. Let us bow our heads to the Lord. Incline your ear and hear us, O Lord, you who deigned to be baptized in Jordan and sanctified the waters. Bless all of us who signify our humility of mind through the bowing of our necks, and grant that we may be filled with your sanctification through our partaking of this water and our being sprinkled therewith. And may it be for us, O Lord, for health of soul and body. For you are the sanctification of our souls and bodies, and to you we give glory and thanksgiving and worship, together with your Father, who is without beginning, in your all-holy and good and life-giving Spirit." I said it all like a bishop. When I finished the blessing of the water, I didn't go to sprinkle water on their heads and present the cross for veneration. Many people don't like that, but I simply held the cross in my hand and looked to see who would come forward. The cabinet minister present came forward first, and the others followed. I pronounced blessings on them. "May God bless you, illuminate and strengthen you." But I was constantly overwhelmed by that feeling that I was uneducated. Before leaving, I made the sign of the cross in the air, blessed them, and said, "Good day to you, my children." And there were university professors there. "The prayers were most magnificent," said the university chancellor. "I was most gratified. I enjoyed the service of blessing immensely, and you recited it all so well by heart. Are you a divinity graduate? I noticed, however, that you made a mistake in the gospel reading. You said, 'became well,' but the correct reading is 'would become well.'" "Well, thank you very much," I replied. "I'm an unlettered priest." This is the gospel we read on the Sunday of the paralytic. It goes as follows. John 5, 1-3. "At that time Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool, which is in Hebrew called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed, waiting for the moving of the water. From time to time an angel would descend into the pool and stir up the water. The first person into the pool after the disturbance of the water would become well from whatever disease he had." Let me remind you of the Kantokion hymn of the Sunday of the paralytic. "By your divine authority, O Lord, raise up my soul as once you raised up the paralytic, for my soul lies woefully paralyzed through all kinds of sin and wrongful actions, so that once healed I may cry out, 'Compassionate Lord, glory Christ to your power.'" This is a good Kantokion to remember and recite as a prayer. I saw Christ so vividly. In the church of Saint Hieromonk, I used to get very moved. As I heard the gospel reading, I was deeply affected. This happened because I saw the image before me, Christ himself. One Holy Friday, we were doing the service. The church was packed with people. I was reading the gospel, and when I came to the phrase, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani," that is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" I was unable to finish it. I didn't read the words, "Why have you forsaken me?" I was overcome with emotion. My voice broke. In front of me, I saw the whole tragic scene. I saw that face. I heard that voice. I saw Christ so vividly. The people in the church waited. I said nothing. I was unable to continue. I left the gospel on the reading stand and turned back into the sanctuary. I made the sign of the Holy Cross and kissed the holy table. I brought to my mind another image, a better one. No, not a better one. There was no more beautiful image than that one, but the image of the resurrection came to my mind. So at once I calmed down. Then I returned to the holy doors and said, "Excuse me, my children, I got carried away." Then I picked up the gospel book and read the passage from the beginning. But at that moment the whole congregation was moved to tears. That was bad. A person may think what he will, but it is not good to allow ourselves to be carried away. We need to be restrained. What God's love and providence does. The years after the war were very difficult, and people struggled hard to make a living. As I've told you, I was in the polyclinic at that time. I remember many incidents from those years. Listen, and I'll tell you about one of them. Effie was 17 years old and used to spend the summer with her parents and her brother at Boiati, a northern district of Athens. They had a vegetable garden and they used to sell the produce. One evening, Effie's mother sent down to a shop close by to buy some paraffin oil for the lamp. At that time, remember, they didn't have electricity. On her way back to the house, Effie met a boy who was in her class at school. They exchanged a few words about their lessons. The place where they had stopped to speak was behind a parked lorry. At that moment, Effie's brothers passed by and saw them speaking. He misconstrued the situation because he thought their conversation wasn't so innocent, and he told their mother, "Effie has shamed us," he said. "She was speaking to a boy on the street." When Effie arrived home, her mother scolded her angrily and beat her. Moral principles were very strict at that time. Effie was deeply mortified. She was aggrieved and indignant at the injustice and her brother's suspicion. The next day, her father, who had been away from home, returned. He treated her differently, with understanding and kindness. "I don't believe all that," he told her. "Come on, let's go and water the vegetable garden. You'll watch, and when you see that one section has been watered, tell me, and I'll turn the water into the furrow around the next section." So that's what they did. Effie, however, had not slept at all the previous night. Her distress and the injustice were choking her. She was in despair and decided to put an end to her life. And as she set out for the vegetable garden with her father, she made up a plan. She would take some weed killer. In the evening when they were finished with the watering, she would drink it secretly and die. She thought to herself, "Then I'll see, will they love me?" So she took the weed killer and put it in her pocket and waited for night to fall to drink it. The difficult moment was not long in coming. Her father, suspecting nothing, said to her, "Go down to the bottom of the garden and turn off the water." She went quickly. She was out of sight. There was no one near her. Her father was a good many yards away, and trembling, she put her hand into her pocket. At that precise moment, she heard footsteps. Before she could move, an unknown priest suddenly appeared before her. He greeted her and said, "Dear Effie, you know how wonderful paradise is, light, joy, and delight. Christ is all light, and he scatters joy and delight on everyone. He's waiting for us in the next life to give us the gift of paradise. But there is also hell, which is all darkness, sadness, distress, anxiety, and depression. If you swallow what you've got in your pocket, you'll go to hell. So throw it away at once so that we don't lose the beauty of paradise." Effie was lost for words to begin with, but after a little while she said to the priest, after she had unconsciously thrown away the poison, "Wait, and I'll call my father to see you." She ran up to the garden. She was lost from sight as she ran through the high corn stalks to find her father. She found him and said, "Father, come quickly and see a priest who has come to the bottom of our garden." When they arrived at the place where they expected to find the priest waiting, there was no one there. For a long time, Effie was unable to explain all that had happened that evening. She couldn't explain the disappearance of the priest. She wanted to find him again because he had saved her life. In the meantime, every winter the whole family went to stay in Athens, and Effie frequently visited her godmother, who was a very devout woman, and she would stay with her for long periods. Her godmother often used to entertain priests, monks, and theologians in her house. Once, when Effie went to see her godmother, she learned that there was a visitor in the lounge. Effie didn't know who it was. Her godmother came into the kitchen at one point and said to her, "Effie, my dear, prepare a sweetmeat and a cup of coffee and bring it into the lounge for our visitor." Effie prepared everything. She took a little time, however, and just as she was carrying it through, her godmother appeared again and said, No, not on that tray. Use the silver tray because it's an important visitor." Effie returned to the kitchen, changed the tray, and carried it into the lounge. But what did she see? The tray nearly dropped from her hands. She saw before her the priest who had appeared to her on that difficult evening in the vegetable garden. "I'm Father Porphyrios," I said to her with a smile. And so we got to know each other, and ever since we have developed a great friendship. Effie got married and had lots of children. God gave her his blessing. You see the means that God can employ when he wants to save a person. St. Nicholas, Cilicia, 1955 to 1979. Some great pain, some problem led them to set out on the rough track leading to St. Nicholas. We lived for more than 20 years in that deserted area. God fulfilled my desire to work in a hospital. I spent 33 years at the polyclinic, but I cherished within me another deep desire, to find a site and build a holy monastery. And after some searching, I found St. Nicholas at Cilicia. It was a dependency of the holy monastery of Pendalee. One day I went there by the grace of God. The church appeared from afar off, and when I arrived, I went in. It was a place of prayer, old and with a few icons. Outside were a few small, smoke-blackened rooms. In the meantime, night had fallen. I was alone. There was no way I could go back to Athens. I lay down to sleep in the church, and after a short time I heard characteristic tapping. It came from the wall above my head. The icon of St. Nicholas was hanging there. The tapping was coming from the icon. I felt that the saint wanted me to go and live there. I went, and I brought my parents, my sister, and my niece. As a monk, I realized that monks who live on their own in the world lose their way. We had great peace there. We lived very nicely, even though the conditions were primitive. We lived for more than 20 years in that deserted area. At that time, it was a true wilderness. The whole area around St. Nicholas was covered in vegetation. There were old and young pine trees, plane trees, bushes here and there, thyme plants, disseminating their fragrances, cyclamens growing out of the cracks in the rocks, anemones, and other wild flowers according to the season. It was a paradise, exceedingly beautiful. I wanted to create a monastery there, but God did not permit it. St. Nicholas is not very far from Pendalee, and in particular from the social services center known as Pikpa. But at that time there was no road. You had to walk on foot or go by donkey for an hour along a rough track and then follow a goat path for another 20 minutes in order to get to St. Nicholas, which was built on a rocky hill. We gradually opened up a narrow pathway so we could have easier access and bring in essential provisions, whatever we could not supply from our own garden. I enjoyed the garden. I bought a handheld cultivator to prepare the ground as well as possible. The garden had everything: tomatoes, pumpkins, onions, garlic, and so on. My great love was for the trees. I was filled with joy to look at them. I planted 400 trees: walnut trees, plum trees, pear trees, apple trees, peach trees, almond trees, hazelnut trees, medlar trees, and pomegranate trees. I loved the work. I always said, and still will say, work as if you were immortal and live as if you were on the point of death. That is, plant walnut trees, fig trees, and olive trees, even if you're 90 years old. Is it possible for your heart not to leap as you plant them, even if passers-by see you tiring yourself out and say, "Poor wretched soul"? To protect the trees from diseases, we would spray them with sulfur and copper sulfate. I used to come up from Pendalee with a sack on my back with the saplings. I lavished great care on them. I employed other workers as well because I didn't have much time as I was still working at the polyclinic. It was my duty to be in St. Gerasimos early in the morning, and so I left for Athens the previous evening. When someone would come to talk to me and our conversation went on until late, I would leave St. Nicholas at midnight. We had water in abundance for our vegetables at St. Nicholas. Down in a valley with lots of plane trees, there was a spring. I installed a pump there to pump the water high up the hill to a cistern I made to collect the water there. And it was drinking water, of course, in order to have a little cool water in the summer because we didn't have a refrigerator. I put water in a long-necked little earthenware pitcher which I bought in Aegina, and that kept the water cool. I also sold chickens. I had rented a plot of land belonging to the holy monastery of Pendeli opposite of the observatory, and I kept about 1,000 chickens there. We couldn't have any more because the plot of land was small. As I have told you, I had in mind to build a monastery, and so I found various ways of collecting money for that purpose. We were quite isolated in Cilicia, and so we wanted to hear a service or divine liturgy on one of the Athenian radio stations, and also to hear the weather forecast and the news, to learn what was going on in the world and what to pray for. So I decided to make a radio of my own invention. I placed an aerial antenna on a pine tree 15 meters high, and I fixed a cable to the wall of the church and tied it to a wild pear tree. Well, this primitive radio had no on-off switch, so it played day and night without stop, but I had adjusted it to play quietly so that it wouldn't annoy us. When I wasn't required at St. Gerasimos', I would celebrate at St. Nicholas, and gradually people started to come there to attend church or to make confession. We became one big family with all these people, the family of Cilicia. They were glorifying God for the miracle. Other people, however, would also come from time to time. Some great pain, some problem, led them to set out along the rough track leading to St. Nicholas. So one day a woman with her husband and 4 little children arrived. They were young and hadn't been married many years. To begin with, they hadn't wanted children. Then they decided, let's have a child. And they had one set of twins and then another, so that they ended up with 4 children. So they'd all come here, and the young woman, she was 30 years old, she said to me, "Yeranda, I'm in great pain. I'm not at all well." As she was speaking to me, I looked at her carefully and put my hand below her chin. "Here," I said to her, "do you feel a constriction?" "Yes," she replied. "And you are overtaken by a kind of sadness which completes its cycle. That is to say, to begin with, you feel a constriction, and then a feeling of sorrow comes over you, and you can't move. You move, you might even laugh, but inside you experience this state." "Yes," she confirmed to me. I painted her condition to her so very well, and she felt pleased. Then I put my hand once more on her neck. "Don't imagine there's anything the matter with you," I said to her. "You've no longer got any of these symptoms." I still had my hand on her neck, and suddenly I said to her, "There, it's all gone now." Because I saw it. As I saw, her neck had nothing the matter with it. She also said to me, "It's all gone now. I feel perfectly well in myself." Then I said to her, "Kneel down." She knelt down, and I placed one hand in front of her neck and the other in the back of her head, and started to say, "Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me." Then I remained in a silent state for a short time. Then, as she was kneeling there, she cried out, "Ah!" as she felt relief. "Off you go now, then. Get up now," I said to her. "There are other people waiting now." She kissed my hand and left. She went a little way off and started something of a commotion among all the people there. Her husband, too, was overjoyed. They were glorifying God for the miracle. You should see the pain which some people have to bear. Another time, Costa's parents came from Xylocastro. You should see the pain that some people have to bear. They were good people, but both their children, Costas and Maria, became fanatic followers of Sai Baba of India. Costas was a medical student. He left home along with his sister just before Easter. As they were leaving the house, the father said to his daughter, "Joyous resurrection, Maria." "The resurrection has come, Father, but people haven't recognized it," she replied. In the meantime, their parents continually gave them money. Now they have stopped this because they were using it for their so-called God. Kostas went to Thessaloniki to spread his propaganda. Indeed, he was beaten up there. He tried to proselytize some young people there, and their parents got a hold of him and beat him up. These good people brought me a periodical, and on the cover there's a photograph of Sai Baba, the guru. He'd created a new religion in which they believe that he is the new Christ who came into the world to save it and to lead it to truth. They say he is the, quote, new God. Sai Baba is alive now. He's married and has his wife and 2 children next to him. At the bottom of the photograph, we see lots of young people who are his followers. Many of them, indeed, are educated people. How did these educated young people end up there? On another page, they are kissing his feet. The days of that Christ, the true Christ that is, are over now, he tells them. This is another age, he tells you. Everything now is changing. It's like a fairy tale. Perhaps Sai Baba is mad. They say he has collected a lot of money. I'll tell you about another related incident. One day an officer in the Greek Navy took me down to the waterfront in Oripo. We walked along the breakwater where a man was fishing, and I said to the officer, "Go, get me one of the fish that man is catching." The fisherman, however, replied, "The basket is empty. I've been here since the morning, and I've caught nothing. Go, leave me in peace." I said to him, "Throw your hook into the sea." "Go away," he said to us in an aggravated tone of voice. We turned to go, but at that moment, just as the fisherman threw his line into the sea, he felt a bite on it. He drew in the line, and a large fish was struggling on the hook. He shouted out to us, "Don't go! Come here! Don't go away! I've caught a fish!" The officer said, "I know why that happened, Father. It happened so that I would believe in you, that you are of God, and so that the fishermen would believe. Up till now, I believe in the new Christ, the Sai Baba of India. Now I believe in the true Christ." We remained for hours in the divine light. At St. Nicholas in Cilicia, I devoted most of my time to Holy Confession. There was, of course, also lots of time for prayer, especially at night. I'll tell you about an incident in relation to this. Once, it was late evening. My sister and I decided we would go together to pray in the Church of St. Nicholas. We said we would eat first, wait for everyone to go to sleep, then we would get up and go into the church in secret. We closed the door and started to pray. Kyrie Jesu Christe, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. After a short time, we were flooded by a light, a divine light. We continued the Kyrie Jesu Christe, the Lord Jesus Christ, and we experienced a joy, ineffable joy. We remained there for hours in the divine light, and then as the light gradually left, we continued the Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. Then we returned to the room. Our mother was awake and waiting for us, and as soon as we opened the door, she said, "Where did you go? Is that why you sent me off to bed? Did you think I didn't see you? I saw you through the window. I saw everything. I saw a light that descended from heaven and entered the church. I watched it, and I started weeping. Look, my eyes are filled with tears." The old lady was of a grouchy disposition, but very pious. Even though the door was closed, she saw the light. The light had flooded the church. Another time, when we were living in Pendeli, was a great feast. Nativity or Pascha, I can't remember, and the old lady got up and said, "I'm going to go over to St. Nicholas. His oil lamps have gone out, or so I feel." It was an hour and a half there and another hour and a half to come back on foot. She went and discovered the church bathed in light and all the lamps lit. The Holy Monastery of the Transfiguration, Milisi, from the years 1979 to 1991. I would like the monastery to be a place to which people with sorrows and afflictions can come for refuge and find comfort, strength, and healing. I harbored the desire to create a monastery. An old dream of mine, as I've told you, was to create a monastery, a place that would be a spiritual workshop where souls would be sanctified and cultivated and glorify the name of God unceasingly. I would like it to be a place to which people with sorrows and afflictions can come for refuge and find comfort, strength, and healing. For years, while we were living with my sister and niece in the Turkovunia area, we had knitting machines, and we worked. Yes, we knitted vests. We collected money for this purpose. We were very thrifty in relation to food, clothes, and everything. So we purchased the first plots of land with this money. Thereafter, money and labor were contributed and continue to be contributed by Christians who appreciate the value of the project. For years, I started searching to find the right site. I never wanted to resort to real estate agents. I went to various places. I wanted the place to be sheltered from the wind, but to have a view. I prayed, as I was accustomed to do, for God to guide me. I wanted the grace of God to assure me about this. I prayed the Lord Jesus Christ constantly. Finally, God showed me the present site, on the hilltop at Milisi, as the place to build the monastery. A shepherd told me the place was called Saint Sotira. I liked the site and asked if it was for sale. Yes, they told me, it belongs to Mr. Baloka from Milisi, and he's promised it to his daughters, Eleni and Spiridula. It's them you'll have to get in touch with. I then went close to the site and prayed. I wanted to know if it had water. I saw that it did have water, and indeed very good water, and that pleased me very much. But I saw that the water was very deep underground, and I thought, how can this water be brought to the surface? I saw water in other places. It was the same water, and lower down, at a distance of about 1.5 kilometers from the hilltop, the water was not so deep down. So I thought I would buy a plot of land there and drill a well, pump the water up to the site where I would build the monastery. So, with God's illumination, I secured the water. Then I checked to see that a road would be opened up to bring in electricity and a telephone line. I looked to see if it was south-facing, if it was sheltered from the wind, and whether it was exposed to the north wind or was damp. I wanted to see the path of the sun so that in winter there would not be rooms that didn't see the sun. For months I went and observed how the sun was, at sunrise, at midday, at sunset, so that we could build in such a way that the sun would fall on the building both at sunrise and at sunset, so that the last ray of light would fall on the holy monastery. All these things proved favorable. At once I set in motion the process of purchasing it. We bought it and started the work. I bent down and drank the water noetically. We started digging the foundations and building without water. It wasn't easy to obtain a reliable supply of spring water at the outset, so we constructed a large cistern which held 640 cubic meters of rainwater. In spite of this, the water from the cistern was not enough, and for 5 or 6 years we were obliged to buy water from Kefisia. We spent a lot of money each year on water. We had planted trees which we watered with purchased water. It was necessary, therefore, for us to exploit the water which I saw beneath the site. But for this, a lot of money was going to be required, because the water was very deep down, and a suitable person would have to be found to do the work. The matter, it occupied my mind. A solution would have to be found. God found the solution. Listen to what happened. One day, a man came to ask my advice about a certain matter. For his benefit, Christ revealed to me certain things about his family affairs. He was taken aback, and he said to me, "Hey, no one apart from my wife knows about these things you're telling me. They're very, very secret." In his enthusiasm, he said to me, "What would you like me to bring you, Elder?" "Nothing," I replied. "Have you water at the monastery?" he asked. "No," I said, "we don't." "Then I'll bring up water for you. I have well drilling equipment." "What will it cost?" I asked him. "Nothing," he replied. "I'll meet all the costs of drilling, and I'll bring up a pump." "Very well," I said. "You are saying this before Christ." And he left. A few days later he appeared with a drilling machine. He drilled down to a depth of 38 meters. But he came on a hard rock and didn't want to proceed any further. I implored him, and he brought another better drill and went down to a depth of 80 meters, but without finding water. Again he came upon a hard rock, and the drill wouldn't progress any further. In despair he said to me, "I can't find any water, Elder. I'm going to leave." "You mustn't leave," I told him. "I'm going to have to leave," he repeated. Then, because I was blind, I asked one of the sisters, and she took me down to behind the point where they were drilling, about 25 meters from the drill head, to a place hidden among the pine trees so that they wouldn't see me. There I prayed, and went and found the stream of the water noetically. I made the sign of the cross and prayed. From there I measured mentally, noetically, how deep down the water was, just as I was accustomed to do, because on other occasions when I was younger, I had found water for people who asked me to, and not only did I find it, but I tasted it noetically to check the quality of the water, whether it was good, whether it was seawater, salty or fresh water, so on. I took a measuring stick and measured downwards, mentally that is. I measured 1, 2, 3. The water was very deep down, and so I started to count with a 10-meter measuring stick, mentally, of course. I said 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100. I felt great exaltation. I had found the water even though it was so deep down. I felt an inexpressible joy. Immediately I thought of tasting it to see whether it was good. I bent down and I drank it noetically. It was exceedingly good. Pleased and excited, I returned to my cell, and after a short time I called Nicholas Midas. That was the name of the man with the drilling equipment. I said to him, "You'll have to go very deep down." "It'll be solid rock, Yerunda," he replied. "There won't be any water. I don't have that many pipes. I'm going to leave." "You won't leave," I told him. "Go, bring pipes. I won't let you leave." The next day, he brought pipes, went down to the depth I had told him. There he found a spring with an abundant flow of good and satisfying water. He was pleased himself, and we were all overjoyed. It was a blessing of the Lord, a spring of holy water. We sang a service of paraclesis at the Church of the Transfiguration of the Savior and thanksgiving to the Lord for the great miracle. It was a miracle of the transfiguration of the Lord. In the University of the Church. When I first thought of creating a women's monastery, many ideas came into my mind, a very great many. Most importantly, I wanted to gather around me a number of nuns who would love me in Christ and whom I would love in Christ. I wanted them all to be true nuns imbued with the spirit of monastic life, without jealousies and without such things that women usually have. I wanted them to have love and good order among themselves. Also, I wanted us to have a handicraft which would occupy us for 2 or 3 hours a day in the morning. But the center of gravity I wanted to place on the, quote, University of the Church. By that I mean the hymns, the canons, the midnight offices, the mid-hour offices, the Psalter, the Paractiki, the Meneon, the Theotokoron, Triodion, Pentecosterion, all the service books of the Church. I wanted us, if possible, to read everything that is prescribed in the Book of Liturgical Order, the so-called Typikon. I thought of reading the sections from the Psalter before midday so that we wouldn't read them during the night and make the sisters tired. Devotion to and occupation with the hymns and readings is a great thing in my view, a very great thing, because in that way a person is sanctified without realizing it. He acquires love and humility and everything as he hears the words of the saints in the various liturgical books. We need to dwell on this. This needs to be our daily occupation and delight in the church. And then again every day, at some point before mealtime or in the afternoon, we would read for an hour or an hour and a half from the great fathers of the church. In the evening we would read again all together, and also privately in our cells, but again at a specified time. There needs to be a timetable. Many convents have the habit of striking the bell 3 times at a certain hour, and wherever each sister happens to be, she kneels down and for 10 minutes repeats the Jesus prayer, Kyrie Jesu Christe eleison me, Lord Jesus Christ have mercy on me. In practice, this is difficult, but do you know how wonderful it is to be watering the garden as soon as you hear the bell to kneel down, or else for all the nuns to come out and kneel down in silence? And for 10 minutes we say with intensity the Lord Jesus Christ, all together, whatever we happen to be, as one person united with Christ in prayer of the heart. Then we continue our work. The holy monastery needs to become a school. Do you know what it means to be a school? We need to have a lively interest in what we're doing. It's no use becoming half asleep. Even if you're uneducated or whatever, you'll come to the reading desk. And after 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 10 times, you'll wake up. You'll learn the Our Father and the Creed. You'll have another sister who will show you. 1 or 2, 3 years, you'll have learnt to read. I would like, of course, all the sisters to read well, that is, clearly and distinctly, and from the heart. I believe that the Lord would work many miracles through this our love. My dream for the monastery was for it to exist in a state of paradise, for services and confession to take place 24 hours a day, for there to be lots of priests and confessors, so that they could alternate, just like doctors on duty in a hospital, so that people wounded by various afflictions of body and of soul, and by the injuries of sin, could come there at any time of the day or night, for there to be a telephone which would be answered day and night by the sisters, so that they could offer comfort to all those brought to despair by the various traumas of life, and lead them by their word to Christ, the great Comforter, so that in this way their souls might be saved and filled with the heavenly light which divine grace would give them. And I myself would like to hear the confessions of the people who would come. When someone who was sick would come, and above all those who were sick through the works of the tempter, I would hear their confession, and then the sisters would come and sing with devotion a service of supplication on their behalf. That is to say, I would get the sick person to kneel down, and I, wearing my priest's stole, my epitrachelion, would sit in a chair and read prayers, while at the same time the sisters, with one voice, would sing the service of supplication. I believe that the Lord would work many miracles through this our love. Many of the sick would become well through the grace of God. For example, a father would come in distress and say, "My child suffers from giddy spells and falls to the ground." We would keep the child in the monastery for some time. All the sisters, who are one spirit, one soul, and one heart with their elder, would kneel down, and the prayer of all would influence the situation. A gathering of nuns in prayer, it has great power. It works wonders, and that is what I desire and what I long for. That is what I want to do in the monastery. And there is something else that I would like in the monastery. I would like to build a fine, large church. Someday, many people may come here to make confessions, to receive Holy Communion, to pray, to exercise themselves in the prayer of the heart. My dream is for the spiritual fathers who have immersed themselves deeply and vigorously in mystical theology in the desert of the Holy Mountain, to come and teach prayer of the heart in the rooms under the church. For them to come, albeit for one day. Of course, there are many who don't want either to open themselves up or to reveal themselves, and even those, however, we could bring one day and have them leave the next. What relief would be given in this way to all those souls that are tortured by the passions and the other trials of life? The monastery must receive souls with the fear of God and inspire, not with teachings and sermons, but with prayer, fear of God, and living example. This is an exceedingly delicate matter. For example, when someone comes to the monastery, we should offer him hospitality, but it is not necessary to say many words. The hospitality should be given through the church. That is to say, we should take our guest to prayer, to the services of Vespers and Compline. We should read the services very clearly and distinctly. We should sing reverently, and a sense of order and silence should predominate. We may say a few edifying words. We will offer also material things, something to eat and to drink, for example, but what will preponderate will be silence, and what will speak will be our example. Our disposition will teach the person more than anything else. It's not necessary to deviate from this tactic. This, rather than words, will be of benefit. If we maintain a good order and are devoted to Christ, the whole monastery will be sanctified. This, of course, needs to be done simply and naturally, without anxiety and effort on the part of the sisters. This, I believe, is the best form of missionary activity. Very soon, birds will start to come to the monastery. They will hear the bell, and they will come to eat. They will sit outside and listen to the vespers. They are our companions from the forest who will come to participate in our prayer. Christ is risen. Christos anesti. Today a number of my spiritual children visited me in my cell, and we sang together 3 times the hymn, Christ is risen from the dead. The Paschal greeting I gave them was, I pray that the resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ may raise up in our souls every noble and beautiful sentiment, and may it lead us all to holiness and to triumph over our old self, together with the passions and the desires. This is what the Lord asks. This is why we pray that his resurrection may help us, that it may give us grace to put to flight and mortify our old self and become worthy of his church. So we pray for the Lord to help us. The greatest miracle worked by Christ is his resurrection. Don't let us ever forget this. Many happy returns. One of them said that today all things are praying, the earth, the sky, the stars, the fragrant flowers, the bubbling streams, the trilling nightingales, the fluttering butterflies, all are singing Christos anesti. And he got so excited that he started shouting out in joy, Christos anesti! I got enthused in the same way on the holy mountain. It was Pascha. I climbed up on my own toward Mount Athos to a height of about 800 meters. I had the Old Testament with me, and I looked at the clear blue sky, at the sea which stretched out endlessly, the trees, the birds, the butterflies, and all the beauties of nature, and I shouted full of enthusiasm, Christos anesti! As I shouted like this, I stretched out my arms passionately, and they remained stuck firm. I had gone mad. I opened the Old Testament a little. My eyes fell on the words from the Wisdom of Solomon. O God of my fathers and Lord of mercy, who made all things by your word and by your wisdom formed man to have dominion over creatures you have made, and to rule the world in holiness and righteousness, and to pronounce judgment in uprightness of soul, give me the wisdom that sits by your thrones, and do not reject me from among your servants. For I am your slave and the son of your maidservant, a man who is weak and short-lived, with little understanding of judgment and laws. I became completely absorbed in these divine words. I stayed for hours without being aware of the passing of time. My elders wondered where I was. Listen to how the wise Solomon, he continues. Wisdom, chapter 9. And with you is wisdom, who knows your works and was present when you made the world, and who understands what is pleasing in your sight and what is right according to your commandments. Send her forth from the holy heavens, and from the throne of your glory dispatch her, that she may be with me and toil, so that I may learn what is pleasing to you, for she knows and understands all things, and she will guide me chastely in my actions and guard me with her glory. Do you realize how important these words were for me? She understands what is pleasing in your sight and what is pleasing to you. Seek these things, devote yourselves to these things, and fill yourselves with fervent desire for these things. Without realizing, you will fall in love with Christ. Kafso Kalivia, Athos, 1991. I ask all of you to forgive me for whatever I have done to upset you. My dear spiritual children, now, while I am still of sound mind, I wish to give you some advice. From the time that I was a little boy, I was always given to sins. And when my mother sent me to watch the flocks on the hillside, my father had gone to America to work because we were poor. While I was looking after the animals, I read, syllable by syllable, the life of St. John the hut dweller. And I fell in love with St. John. And as a young boy that I was, 12 or 15 years old, I can't recall exactly, I prayed very intensely. And wanting to imitate St. John with great effort, I secretly left my parents and came to Kafso Kalivia on the holy mountain, and placed myself in obedience to 2 elders. They were brothers, Pantaleimon and Ioannikios. It happened that they were very devout and virtuous, and I loved them very much. And so, with their prayers, I was utterly obedient to them. This helped me immensely. I also felt a great love for God. My time on the holy mountain passed very well for me, but by God's disposition for my sins, I became very ill, and my elders told me to go to my parents in my village, Agios Ioannis in Evia. And while from the time I was a little boy I had committed many sins, when I returned to the world, I continued to commit sins, which up to the present time have become very many. People, however, looked on me favorably and all proclaim that I am a saint, but I feel that I am the most sinful person in the world. Of course, I have confessed as many sins as I could remember, and I know that for those that I have confessed, God has granted me forgiveness. But now I have a sense that my spiritual sins are also very many, and I ask for all of you who have known me to pray for me, because when I was alive, very humbly, I prayed for you. But now that I am going to leave for heaven, I have the sense that God is going to say to me, "What do you want here?" I have only one thing to say to him. I am not worthy, O Lord, to be here, but do for me whatever your love wishes. What will happen thereafter, I do not know. I desire, however, for God's love to do its work. And I always pray for my spiritual children to love God, who is everything, so that he may grant us to enter into his earthly, uncreated church, because we need to start from here. I always attempted to pray, to read the hymns of the church, holy scriptures, the lives of our saints, and I pray that you will do the same. I ask all of you to forgive me for whatever I have done to upset you. Signed, Hieromonk Porphyrios in Kafsokalivia on the 4th/17th of June, 1991. Footnote. Elder Porphyrios, sensing that his life was approaching its end, went to the Holy Mountain in 1991, where, on the 2nd December, he fell asleep in the Lord in his hermitage of St. George, Kafsokalivia. This letter, which he left as a spiritual testament, was dictated to one of the monks there. Amen.